The November wind cut through the valley of Ravenhollow like a thief, stealing warmth from any exposed skin. Snow blanketed the ancient rooftops of the isolated mountain town, a place forgotten by time and shielded from the modern world by towering peaks that stood like sentinels against the outside world. As twilight descended, lanterns flickered to life along cobblestone streets, casting long shadows against buildings that had witnessed centuries of winters. Eleanor Frost stood at the highest window of Ravenhollow Castle's grand library, her slender fingers tracing frost patterns on the ancient glass. 23 winters had passed since her birth, yet she felt much older, as if memories not her own sometimes whispered at the edges of her consciousness. Her reflection stared back at her, pale skin, long honey-blonde hair gathered in a simple knot, and those unusual eyes that had always made townsfolk whisper. Not quite green, not quite amber, they shifted in the light like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. The silver raven pendant at her throat caught the lamplight, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the leather-bound tomes surrounding her. The necklace, her grandmother's final gift before death, felt unusually warm against her skin tonight. A warning, perhaps. The creatures in her dreams had been restless recently, great wolves with eyes that burned like molten gold, running through snowbound forests as if fleeing some unseen threat. "Eleanor, the guests have begun to arrive." Dr. Margaret Sullivan's voice broke through her reverie. The elderly librarian stood in the doorway, her silver-streaked hair pinned severely away from a face lined with wisdom and secrets. "Lord Blackwood expects all staff present for the opening ceremonies." Eleanor nodded, smoothing down the simple blue dress she had spent hours mending for this occasion. The fabric, once her mother's, was the only suitable garment she possessed for the winter solstice festival, the most important celebration in Ravenhollow's calendar. 3 years had passed since the fire that devoured her parents' bookshop, along with everything they owned, leaving her with nothing but ash, memories, and whispered accusations. "You look lovely, dear," Dr. Sullivan said, her eyes softening, "though I would advise avoiding Lady Catherine's circle tonight. She seems particularly venomous this season." The older woman didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Catherine Harrington had made Eleanor's life a misery since childhood, her cruelty evolving from schoolyard taunts to sophisticated torment as they aged. The daughter of Ravenhollow's wealthiest merchant family, Catherine wielded her status like a weapon, particularly against those she deemed beneath her station. "I'll remain in the shadows," Eleanor promised, touching the raven pendant for reassurance, "as grandmother always advised." Dr. Sullivan's gaze lingered on the pendant. Something like concern flickered across her features before she composed herself. "Sometimes the shadows find us regardless of our intentions," she murmured cryptically. "Come now, we mustn't be late." The great hall of Ravenhollow Castle blazed with the light of 1,000 candles. Ancient tapestries depicting scenes of hunt and folklore adorned walls of weathered stone. Nobles and merchants, adorned in their finest winter finery, mingled beneath vaulted ceilings where carved ravens seemed to watch the proceedings with obsidian eyes. Musicians played haunting melodies on instruments whose designs hadn't changed in centuries. The air smelled of pine, spiced wine, and the particular tension that accompanied gatherings where old rivalries simmered beneath polite veneers. Eleanor moved silently among the guests, nearly invisible in her role as the librarian's assistant. She arranged ceremonial texts on the ancient reading stand, carefully positioning the massive leather-bound tome from which Dr. Sullivan would later recite the traditional verses marking winter's arrival. Most guests ignored her completely. A ghost in blue silk, nothing more than another servant ensuring their comfort. She felt it the moment he entered the hall. A sudden hush fell over the gathered nobility, conversations dying mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward the massive double doors. Eleanor glanced up, her hands freezing in their task. Lord Ezra Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, his commanding presence making the cavernous hall seem suddenly smaller. Tall and broad-shouldered, with raven-black hair that contrasted sharply with piercing blue eyes, the Lord of Ravenhollow appeared more like a warrior king of old than the lord of a remote mountain province. A thin scar traced from his right temple down to his jawline, the only imperfection on features that seemed carved from marble by a master sculptor. 5 years had passed since Ezra Blackwood returned to claim his birthright following his father's mysterious death. 5 years of whispered rumors about the changes he'd brought, the strangers who now served in the castle, the sounds sometimes heard from the surrounding forests on nights when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky. The mountain folk called him many things in private: the Wolf Lord, the Night King, the Alpha, always with equal measures of fear and respect. Eleanor watched him from her position in the shadows, a strange familiarity tugging at her mind. Though they had never spoken, had never been formally introduced, something about his presence resonated with her in ways she couldn't articulate, as if her soul recognized something her mind could not recall. She returned to her task, focusing intently on the ancient text before her, attempting to ignore the subtle shift in the room's energy. Her fingers brushed against the yellowed page, and suddenly, unbidden, an image flashed behind her eyes. A forest clearing, moonlight on snow, wolves circling a standing stone, while a woman with her face raised her hands toward the night sky. Eleanor gasped, jerking her hand away from the book. These momentary visions had plagued her since childhood, these glimpses of places and times she had never seen, triggered by touching objects of significance, another secret she kept carefully hidden. Is something amiss with the ceremonial texts? The voice, deep and resonant, came from directly behind her. Eleanor turned, her heart hammering against her ribs as she found herself looking up into the intense blue eyes of Lord Blackwood himself. This close, she could see flecks of amber near his pupils, an unusual coloration that seemed almost to shift as he studied her face with unsettling focus. "No, my lord," she managed, dropping into a curtsy. "The texts are in perfect order for tonight's reading." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. His gaze dropped to the raven pendant at her throat, lingering there for a moment before returning to her face. "You are Dr. Sullivan's assistant," he stated rather than asked. "The bookseller's daughter." Eleanor stiffened slightly. Few in the upper circles remembered her parentage, or cared to acknowledge it if they did. "Yes, my lord. Eleanor Frost." "I knew your father," Ezra said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. The simple statement struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Before she could respond, a commotion from across the hall drew their attention. Catherine Harrington glided toward them, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson that complemented her dark hair and pale complexion. 3 women followed in her wake: Beatrice Montgomery, Diana Rutherford, and Fiona Wells, daughters of Ravenhollow's most influential families and Catherine's loyal shadows. Their laughter, cutting and deliberate, silenced conversations as they passed. "Lord Blackwood," Catherine purred, offering a deep curtsy that displayed her décolletage to maximum advantage. "How generous of you to grace us with your presence. We feared you might remain secluded in your northern tower, as has become your custom." Ezra inclined his head slightly, his face betraying nothing. "Lady Catherine, I would never miss the Winter Solstice Festival. Tradition remains the foundation of Ravenhollow." Catherine's gaze slid dismissively to Eleanor, her perfect lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "And I see you've met our little librarian. How charming that you take such interest in the staff." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Years of practice at weathering Catherine's barbs serving her well. She prepared to excuse herself from what was clearly becoming an uncomfortable situation when Catherine's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "That pendant," Catherine said, her voice sharpening. "Where did you get such a thing? It looks remarkably like the Ravenclaw family crest." Eleanor instinctively covered the silver raven with her free hand. "It was my grandmother's." Catherine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Your grandmother? A bookseller's mother with a noble family's heirloom?" She turned to her companions. "Perhaps we should inquire about the provenance of other items from the Frost family collection." "It's simply a family keepsake," Eleanor replied evenly, attempting to withdraw her arm from Catherine's grip. A keepsake? Catherine tightened her hold. Or perhaps something taken. Your father had quite the reputation for acquiring rare items through questionable means. Anger flared in Eleanor's chest. My father was an honorable man. An honorable man who died in mysterious circumstances, Catherine countered, surrounded by forbidden texts that some say he shouldn't have possessed. A tense silence descended around them. Other guests had begun to notice the confrontation, some watching with undisguised interest, others with discomfort. Eleanor felt trapped in the growing circle of onlookers, aware that each word exchanged was being carefully noted and would feed the town's gossip mill for weeks to come. I believe, Ezra's voice cut through the tension like a blade, that you are overstepping, Lady Catherine. Catherine released Eleanor's wrist, though her expression remained triumphant. I meant no offense, Lord Blackwood, merely an observation about certain families and their histories. Her gaze traveled slowly over Eleanor's simple blue dress. Though speaking of inappropriate acquisitions, isn't that your mother's gown, Eleanor? Salvaged from the fire, perhaps? It seems rather inadequate for tonight's festivities. Before Eleanor could respond, Catherine's fingers caught the delicate fabric at her shoulder. With a deliberate motion that appeared almost accidental, she pulled, tearing the ancient silk down to expose Eleanor's shoulder and part of her back. The sound of ripping cloth echoed in the sudden silence. "Oh dear," Catherine said with mock concern. "How unfortunate. It seems the dress was more fragile than it appeared." Eleanor froze, mortification washing over her as she felt dozens of eyes upon her partially exposed skin. The dress, the last piece of her mother she possessed, hung in tatters, ruined beyond repair. Tears threatened, but she refused to give Catherine the satisfaction of seeing them fall. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers as Lord Ezra Blackwood moved with unexpected swiftness. In one fluid motion, he removed the heavy fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders and wrapped it around Eleanor, covering her completely in its warmth and in the subtle scent of sandalwood and winter forest that emanated from its folds. "This woman is under my protection now," Ezra declared, his voice carrying through the hall without being raised. Each word carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." Eleanor looked up, unable to hide her shock. Why would the most powerful man in Ravenhollow intervene on her behalf? What could she possibly represent to him beyond an insignificant library assistant? His fingers adjusted the cloak slightly around her shoulders, and when they briefly touched her skin, Eleanor felt an electric current run through her entire body. Ezra seemed to feel it too, his eyes widening slightly as they met hers, a muscle tensing in his jaw. "Come with me," he commanded. Not a request, but a declaration that left no room for discussion. Before Eleanor could process what was happening, his hand found the small of her back, guiding her away from the circle of spectators. They passed Catherine, who appeared to have seen a ghost, and her three companions whose faces had lost all color. As they walked across the hall, Eleanor felt every gaze following them, the weight of Ezra's heavy cloak on her shoulders, carrying a significance she didn't yet fully comprehend. When they reached the doors, Ezra leaned slightly closer, his lips near enough to her ear that only she could hear his next words. "They will pay for this," he promised, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "All of them." The corridors of Ravenhollow Castle stretched before them like a stone labyrinth, passages Eleanor had never traversed despite working in the castle for nearly 2 years. They moved away from the clamor of the festival, each step echoing against ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of winters. Eleanor clutched the fur-lined cloak tightly around her shoulders, still feeling the residual warmth of Ezra's body within its folds. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small against the oppressive silence that enveloped them. Ezra didn't immediately respond. His profile remained severe in the flickering torchlight, the scar on his face appearing deeper in the shadows. "To a place where you can recover without prying eyes," he eventually answered. "My private quarters in the North Tower." Eleanor stopped abruptly. "Your quarters?" I cannot. It would be inappropriate." He turned to face her, and again she had that strange impression of something wild and primal in his eyes, something that defied rationality and awakened an answering wildness within her. "Nothing about tonight has been appropriate, Miss Frost," he said, tension evident in his controlled tone. "Would you prefer to return to the hall, or perhaps to your own quarters where Lady Catherine and her friends will certainly find you later?" Eleanor shuddered at the thought of facing Catherine's continued torment. The public humiliation still burned fresh in her mind. "How do you know my name?" she asked suddenly, realizing they had never been formally introduced. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know the names of everyone who serves in my castle, especially those who spend hours in the library lost in books about Ravenhollow's history." Eleanor felt her face warm. "Do you observe your staff so closely, then?" "I observe what interests me," he replied directly, his intense gaze never leaving hers. They continued their ascent, climbing a spiral staircase that seemed endless until they reached a heavy wooden door intricately carved with the same symbol that adorned the pendant at Eleanor's throat, a raven in full flight. Eleanor's gaze fixed on the engraving. "The Raven of Ravenhollow," she whispered, remembering her history lessons. "They say it was the first creature to inhabit these mountains long before men arrived. It guided the founders to this protected valley, which is why your family adopted the symbol." "No," Ezra opened the door. "We did not adopt the symbol. It chose us." Before Eleanor could question the meaning of that enigmatic statement, she found herself inside Ezra Blackwood's private chamber. The room was spacious, dominated by a roaring fireplace that kept the cruel winter chill at bay. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes covered one entire wall, while another was practically consumed by tall windows offering a privileged view of the mountains and the small town below, now dotted with lights twinkling against the darkness. "Sit," Ezra indicated a chair near the fireplace. "I'll find something for you to wear." Eleanor hesitated momentarily before sinking into the offered seat, still wrapped in his cloak. She watched him cross the room to a dark wooden armoire, his movements possessing a predatory grace that seemed incongruous with his imposing build. "Why did you help me?" The question escaped before she could contain it. Ezra paused, his back to her, his posture suddenly rigid. "What happened in the hall was unacceptable. No one should be treated that way in my home." "But I am only a staff member," Eleanor countered, her voice faltering as she recalled his significant gesture of covering her with his cloak. "You could simply have ordered them to stop. You didn't need to." He turned slowly, holding what appeared to be a shirt of dark blue silk. "Only a staff member," he repeated, his tone containing something she couldn't identify. "Is that what you think of yourself, Eleanor?" The way he pronounced her name sent a shiver down her spine, as if he knew secrets about her that she herself did not. "I am the daughter of bookkeepers who died in the fire, the girl who was fortunate enough to secure employment at the castle thanks to Dr. Sullivan's compassion. Nothing more, nothing less." "Is that what they tell you?" He approached, offering the shirt. "That you owe eternal gratitude for the compassion they've shown you?" Eleanor accepted the garment, feeling the soft texture of the fabric between her fingers. It probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. "Dr. Sullivan was kind when no one else was," she defended her mentor, the only person who had extended a hand after the tragedy. "Dr. Sullivan recognized your value," Ezra corrected. "There is a crucial difference between compassion and recognition, Eleanor." They fell silent for a moment, the crackling fire filling the space between them. "There is a screen there," he pointed to a discreet corner of the room. "You may change in privacy, unless you prefer that I withdraw." "The screen will suffice," Eleanor replied quickly, rising from the chair. Behind the ornate screen, she carefully removed the ruined dress, handling the torn fabric as if saying farewell to the last physical connection with her mother. The blue silk hung in tatters, a symbol of everything she had lost: family, position, security. Eleanor slipped on Ezra's shirt, which fell like a short dress on her smaller frame, the long sleeves covering her hands. When she emerged, she found him standing by the window, observing the night. He had served 2 glasses of a liquid that gleamed amber in the firelight. "Drink," he offered a glass. "It will help calm your nerves." Eleanor accepted hesitantly, taking only a small sip. The liquid went down warm, spreading heat throughout her body. "Tell me about your parents," Ezra requested suddenly, surprising her. "What really happened that night?" The question made Eleanor's heart race. No one in Ravenhollow spoke directly to her about the fire, only whispers and sidelong glances when they thought she wasn't paying attention. "Why do you want to know?" "Because rumors rarely contain the truth," he answered, his eyes fixed on hers. "And because I have reasons to believe there was more to that story than was revealed." Eleanor swallowed hard, feeling the weight of memories she tried to keep locked away. "It was a night like this, cold, with snow falling outside. I had gone to deliver a book to a customer who lived on the outskirts of town. When I returned," she closed her eyes, reliving the horror. "The bookshop was in flames, so high and intense that no one could enter to save them." "And what did they tell you about the cause?" "An accident. A forgotten candle, perhaps." Eleanor took another sip of her drink, seeking courage. "But my father was meticulous. He would never leave a candle burning unattended. He respected books too much for that." Ezra moved closer, sitting in the chair opposite hers. "And what do you believe?" The question hung between them, dangerous and tempting. Eleanor had never shared her suspicions with anyone. "I believe someone wanted to silence him," she finally answered, surprised by her own boldness. "In the weeks before the fire, my father was agitated, concerned. He spent sleepless nights studying ancient texts about Ravenhollow's founding. He said he had discovered something, a truth buried between the lines of the official history." Ezra leaned slightly forward, his expression impossible to read. "What kind of truth?" "He never told me completely, only fragments. He spoke about the true nature of the town's founders, about pacts made in shadows, and the price paid for protection." A heavy silence established itself between them. Through the window, Eleanor could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, dancing in the darkness. "Eleanor," Ezra spoke finally, her name coming as a rough caress from his throat, "do you believe in legends?" The question seemed out of place, but something in his tone made Eleanor respond with honesty. "I grew up surrounded by books of stories and myths. My father used to say that every legend carries a grain of truth at its core." She unconsciously touched the raven pendant at her throat. "Why?" "Because Ravenhollow was built upon legends that most prefer to forget." There was an intensity in his voice that made Eleanor tremble. "Your father was right in his suspicions. There was more to this town's foundation than is written in history books. How could you know that?" "Because my ancestors were there," he answered simply, "and some stories are passed down through generations, only within the family." Something in his statement lit a spark of understanding in Eleanor's mind. The rumors about his family were not merely rumors, they were— Ezra rose abruptly, moving to the fireplace. For a long moment, he simply observed the dancing flames, as if seeking words. "3 nights ago, I dreamed of a young woman with golden hair, surrounded by fire," he said finally. "In the dream, she carried a pendant with the symbol of the raven, the same one you wear now. When I awoke, I knew I needed to find her." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying you dreamed of me before meeting me?" "I am saying I have known you for much longer than you imagine, Eleanor." He turned, his eyes reflecting the glow of the flames, "and that the fire that killed your parents and the pendant you wear are connected to secrets many in Ravenhollow would give their lives to keep buried." "What secrets?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You are not the only one who lost family to fire." His hand touched the scar on his face involuntarily. "My father did not die of natural causes, as officially announced. He was murdered shortly after meeting with a bookseller who had discovered ancient texts about Ravenhollow's true history." The shock of the revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. My father met with yours 3 days before the fire, Ezra confirmed with a nod, and 2 days before my father's death. Eleanor rose suddenly, dizzy with the implications. Are you suggesting they were killed by the same person? For the same reason? I am suggesting that you are in danger, Eleanor. He approached, his hands gripping her arms with gentle firmness. The same danger I faced when I assumed my father's position. There are factions in Ravenhollow who prefer certain truths to remain hidden, truths about what we are, about what runs in our veins. And what are you? Eleanor asked, though part of her already suspected the answer based on the stories her father used to tell on winter nights. Ezra released her arms slowly, taking a step back. For a moment he closed his eyes as if waging an internal battle. When he opened them again, the blue had been completely replaced by a wild, inhuman gold that made Eleanor's heart leap. We are the guardians of the boundary between two worlds, he answered, his voice deeper, almost a growl. Neither entirely human nor entirely beast. Shapeshifters, as some legends call us, wolves in human skin, as others say. The weight of the revelation should have terrified Eleanor, but instead she felt a strange sense of recognition, as if part of her had always known, had always waited for this moment. And I? What do I have to do with this? Your pendant belonged to the first seeress of our pack. Ezra took a step toward her. The one who forged the pact between humans and wolves, who created the sanctuary we call Ravenhollow. A woman with the gift of seeing beyond the veil that separates worlds. A woman with golden hair like yours. Eleanor felt the weight of the pendant against her skin, suddenly more significant. Are you saying I am her descendant? That I carry her blood? I am saying, his eyes burned intensely, that you are her reborn, and that those who want to keep the past buried will do anything to prevent you from recovering your memories and your powers. The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a blade. Eleanor's thoughts swirled like snowflakes in a storm, trying to process Ezra's words. Part of her wanted to laugh, to reject everything as a fantastic story elaborated to distract her from the humiliation she had suffered in the hall. But his eyes, that wild gold that seemed to glow with its own light, told a different story, and somewhere deep in her soul, something resonated with his words. A reborn seeress, she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. That's impossible. Is it? Ezra stepped back slightly, as if he needed to create distance between them. Then how do you explain the dreams, the visions you've had since childhood? Eleanor froze. How do you know about those? An enigmatic smile touched his lips. Your parents kept a journal about you. Your father showed it to mine shortly before he died. Memories Eleanor had locked away resurfaced, nights awake, screaming from nightmares that seemed too real, moments when she touched objects and saw flashes of their owners, inexplicable sensations of impending danger that always proved true. My parents said I had a vivid imagination, she murmured. Your parents protected you from the truth until you were ready. Ezra walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a worn, weathered book. This journal was saved from the fire. Your father entrusted it to mine shortly before he died, as if he knew something was about to happen. Eleanor extended trembling hands toward the book, immediately recognizing her father's handwriting on the yellowed pages, dates, observations, details of episodes she had experienced. The first page bore a simple title, The Awakening of Eleanor. Why did you keep this? She asked, leafing through the pages with reverence. Why didn't you seek me out earlier? Because I needed to be certain. His voice was low, controlled. And because my position is complicated, there are eyes and ears everywhere. Revealing myself to you prematurely would have been dangerous for us both. And now it isn't? Now I have no choice. Ezra approached again, his steps as silent as those of a predator. The lunar cycle is nearly complete, and the signs are appearing. First the dreams, then the incident in the hall. What does Catherine have to do with this? Eleanor frowned in confusion. Lady Catherine Harrington does not act on her own." There was contempt in his voice. "Her family has served a shadow council for generations, a group that opposes the Blackwood leadership and seeks to restore the natural balance, as they call it." "A shadow council?" Eleanor repeated, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Families who believe shifters should remain as beasts, that the connection with humans weakens us." Ezra walked to the window, observing the snow falling more intensely now. "They particularly fear the lineage of seers, women who can see beyond the veil and strengthen the bond between worlds." Eleanor hugged the book to her chest, as if it could protect her. "So the attack in the hall was an attempt to provoke me." "They wanted to see how I would react to you," he confirmed, his fingers touching the cold glass. "To confirm their suspicions about your identity. And you confirmed it by covering me with your cloak." Understanding finally struck Eleanor. That had not been merely an act of kindness, it had been a declaration. Ezra turned to face her, and there was something almost vulnerable in his gaze now. "In our tradition, covering someone with the Alpha's cloak is one of the most significant gestures that exists." His voice was low, almost reverent. "It signifies protection, claim, and recognition." "Recognition of what?" He hesitated, as if measuring his words. "Among our people, there is an ancient belief that each Alpha eventually finds their equal, not a subordinate, but a partner who balances their power. The ancients called her Luna." The term awakened something in Eleanor's memory, a tale her mother told about a woman who could speak to the moon and command the loyalty of even the fiercest wolves. "You think I am this?" Her voice faltered. "I know you are." There was no hesitation now. "The moment I saw you in the silent library among the shelves, I knew there was something different, something that resonated with the most primal part of my being." Eleanor stood, suddenly suffocated by the intensity of his words and the weight of their implications. "This is madness. I am just Eleanor, the orphaned bookseller's daughter. I have no powers. I am not a reborn seer or a Luna or whatever this is." "Then why?" Ezra moved with that predatory grace until he stood behind her. "Has the wolf inside me not stopped howling since you entered this room, for the first time in years?" She felt his heat at her back, so close he almost touched her. Something within Eleanor responded to that proximity, a primal call she had never felt before. "I am afraid," she confessed, keeping her gaze fixed on the snow falling outside. "So am I." The admission surprised her. Being Alpha doesn't mean the absence of fear, Eleanor. It means facing it head on. Eleanor turned to face him, finding his face inches from hers. There was a war happening in his eyes, the human blue fighting against the beast's gold. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "Now I must take you to a safe place. The Shadow Council is certainly already planning their next move." "I can't simply disappear." Eleanor stepped back slightly, trying to think clearly. "I have my job, my small apartment above the old bookshop, places I cannot adequately protect." There was urgency in his voice. "Eleanor, you must understand. Now that I have revealed myself, that I have formally claimed you, they will not hesitate. The next attempt will not be merely to humiliate you." The weight of his words hit Eleanor. They would try to kill me because of legends and superstitions. Because of power. Ezra took her hands between his, and the heat emanating from him was almost feverish. The union between an Alpha and a Seeress is what has kept Ravenhollow protected for centuries. This union strengthens the barriers between worlds, prevents creatures more dangerous than us from invading these lands. Eleanor looked at their intertwined hands, feeling a strange familiarity in that contact, as if her skin recognized his from another time, another life. "So that's it? I have no choice?" Fear began to give way to indignation. "I must abandon my life because some fanatics believe in ancient prophecies?" Ezra's eyes glowed more intensely. "There is always choice, Eleanor. I can protect you, offer you safety, and the chance to discover who you truly are. But if you decide to walk your own path, I will be in danger." Eleanor completed his sentence. "And not just you." He nodded gravely. Those close to you will also become targets. Eleanor thought of Dr. Sullivan, of the kindness she had shown her all these years. She couldn't put her at risk. How long do I have to decide? She asked. Until dawn. Ezra released her hands. When the sun rises, I must formally announce my intentions to the council or retract the gesture I made in the hall. And if you retract? Then I will say it was an impulsive act of protection toward a servant, nothing more. He hesitated. You will return to your normal life, and I will continue to observe you from afar, as I have done since returning to Ravenhollow. The idea of him secretly watching her should have frightened Eleanor, but instead it brought a strange sense of comfort. I need air, she said, moving toward the balcony door. May I? Ezra nodded, opening the door for her. The frigid night air hit Eleanor like a slap, but it was exactly what she needed to clear her thoughts. The balcony offered a panoramic view of the town below and the mountains beyond. Ravenhollow appeared as a collection of twinkling lights against the white mantle of snow, peaceful and oblivious to the turmoil agitating her heart. It's beautiful, isn't it? Ezra appeared at her side, resting his hands on the stone parapet. Is it worth protecting? It's what I have done, he confirmed, his gaze lost in the distance. My father taught me that power brings responsibility. The humans of Ravenhollow don't know about our true nature, but they benefit from the protection we offer. And what do you gain in return? A place to call home, a community. There was a vulnerability in his voice that surprised Eleanor. We are solitary by nature, Eleanor. Most of our kind prefer the forests, the freedom. Few choose to live among humans, adapt to their rules. But I chose to, as did my father and his father before him. Ezra looked at Eleanor, and the gold in his eyes seemed softer. Now I choose to honor the pact my ancestors made with yours, the pact that keeps everyone safe. They stood in silence for several moments, watching the snowflakes dance in the night air. Something was awakening within Eleanor, a certainty she had no words to express, a connection that transcended logic. What would your mother say about all this? She suddenly asked. A shadow crossed Ezra's face. My mother was human. She died when I was 8, during an attack on our home. I'm sorry. Eleanor touched his arm instinctively, and he seemed surprised by the gesture. It was long ago. His voice was controlled, but she could sense the underlying pain. But to answer your question, she would approve of you. It was she who taught me that our strength comes from the union between worlds, not from separation. Something in his words struck a deep chord in Eleanor's soul. She suddenly remembered a recurring dream she'd had, one where she walked through a dark forest, followed by shadows with golden eyes, without fear. I've dreamed of wolves for as long as I can remember, she confessed, surprising them both. I never told anyone because it seemed crazy, but in the dreams, they follow me, protect me. Ezra became completely still, as if fearing any movement might break the moment. What color are they? He finally asked. Black as night, except for one. Eleanor closed her eyes, reliving the image. A gray wolf, larger than the others, with eyes that changed from blue to gold. When she opened her eyes, she found Ezra observing her with almost painful intensity. That's my wolf, he said simply. What you describe is my animal form. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through Eleanor's body. How can I dream of something I've never seen? Because part of you always knew. His hand found hers on the parapet. The soul recognizes what the mind forgets, Eleanor. At that moment, as if responding to a silent call, a solitary howl echoed in the distant mountains. Soon others joined, creating a wild harmony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Your pack? Eleanor asked, feeling a strange fascination with the sound. No, Ezra replied, suddenly tense. These are different. These are the wolves of the Shadow Council. They are watching us? Fear seized Eleanor again. They are proclaiming their intention. Ezra narrowed his eyes, focusing on the darkness beyond the town. "It's a warning to us, to all who oppose them." He turned to Eleanor, his face a mask of determination. "We must act now, Eleanor. We don't have until dawn as I thought." "What do you mean?" "That howl was a declaration of war. They won't wait for the council's formalities." His eyes blazed with urgency. "They will try to eliminate you tonight." Panic threatened to overwhelm Eleanor, but something deeper emerged, a strange calm that seemed to come from another place, another part of herself. "How do you know they will come after me?" "I know their methods." Ezra gently pulled Eleanor inside, closing the balcony doors. The howl was a signal to their agents in town, Lady Catherine's family among them. Eleanor watched him cross the room with decisive steps to an apparently ordinary wall. He pressed a specific point, and a panel silently slid open, revealing a secret compartment. From within, he retrieved a dagger with an ornate silver handle and a small leather pouch. "Take this." He extended the dagger toward Eleanor. "The blade is pure silver, with protective engravings. It won't kill them, but it will cause enough pain for you to escape." Eleanor accepted the weapon with hesitation. It was heavier than it appeared, the metal cold against her skin. "I've never used a weapon before," she confessed. "I hope you won't need to use it now." His eyes met hers. "But if necessary, remember, aim for the chest or throat. Silver reacts with our blood, causing wounds that take time to heal." The reality of the situation began to settle in. This was no longer a fantastic story or a shocking revelation. It was a concrete, immediate threat. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked, trying to focus on practicalities rather than the terror growing within her. "To the sanctuary." Ezra opened the small leather pouch, revealing a pendant similar to hers, but with different engravings. "A place in the mountains known only to the Blackwoods and to those who guard Ravenhollow's secrets." He placed the pendant around his own neck, hiding it beneath his shirt. Then he moved to a carved wooden cabinet and retrieved a heavy dark cloak, extending it to Eleanor. "Wear this over the shirt. We'll need to pass through cold corridors." Eleanor obeyed, feeling the weight of the fabric on her shoulders. The cloak smelled of dried herbs and something she couldn't identify, perhaps the same wild scent that emanated from him. "And your cloak?" she asked, noting he had not replaced the garment he had given her. "I won't need it where we're going." An enigmatic smile touched his lips. "In the mountains, I wear a different covering." The implication of his words sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. He would transform into a wolf to take her to the mountains. "How much time do we have before they find us?" "Minutes, perhaps." Ezra moved to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. "I can smell them approaching. They're quick." "We could fight," Eleanor suggested, the courage in her voice surprising her. He looked at her with something like admiration. "We could, but it would be imprudent. There are many of them, and we're at a disadvantage here in the castle. We need to escape before they completely surround us." Ezra moved away from the door to a section of the opposite wall. With a precise movement, he pressed a sequence of points in the ornate molding, revealing another hidden passage. This time, a narrow door that seemed to lead to a dark corridor. "The Blackwoods always build escape routes," he explained, upon noticing Eleanor's surprised look. "This castle is hundreds of years old and has almost as many secret passages as regular chambers." "Where does it lead?" Eleanor asked, observing the threatening darkness of the corridor. "To the old dungeons, and from there, a tunnel emerges outside the castle walls near the northern forest." He extended his hand. "Are you ready?" Eleanor hesitated only a second before intertwining her fingers with his. His touch was warm, almost feverish, and sent a current of energy up her arm. "Yes," she answered, surprising them both with the firmness in her voice. The narrow passage closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo with finality. Darkness engulfed Eleanor and Ezra as they moved deeper into the hidden corridor, the only light coming from a small lantern Ezra had grabbed before entering. The stone walls pressed close on either side, forcing them to walk single file. Eleanor followed Ezra's broad shoulders, her fingers still intertwined with his as he led her through the labyrinth beneath Ravenhollow Castle. The air grew colder and damper as they descended, carrying the musty scent of centuries past. Water trickled somewhere in the darkness, a persistent reminder of the mountain springs that ran beneath the ancient fortress. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space, each sound seeming to travel ahead of them like a herald announcing their escape. The castle was built over a network of natural caves. Ezra's voice came back to her, barely above a whisper. My ancestors expanded them over generations, creating escape routes that would serve in times of siege or danger. How many people know about these passages? Eleanor asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Very few living souls, he replied. Some knowledge is passed only through blood. The passageway twisted and turned, descending ever deeper. Eleanor lost all sense of direction in the darkness, trusting entirely in Ezra's guidance. The dagger he had given her pressed against her side, a cold reminder of the danger pursuing them. Finally, the narrow corridor opened into a larger chamber. The lantern's light revealed massive stone pillars rising to a vaulted ceiling. Ancient chains hung from iron rings embedded in the walls, and heavy wooden doors lined one side of the room. The dungeons of Ravenhollow Castle, unused for generations, but preserved like a museum of darker times. We're beneath the east wing now, Ezra explained, holding the lantern higher. The tunnel exit is just beyond those storage rooms. Eleanor shivered, not entirely from the cold. The oppressive weight of history pressed down on her, as if the ghosts of those once imprisoned here lingered in the shadows beyond the lantern's reach. Her fingers tightened around Ezra's hand unconsciously. The dungeons haven't been used for their original purpose in over a century, he said, sensing her discomfort. My grandfather converted them to storage and meeting rooms for the Council of Guardians. The Council of Guardians? Eleanor asked as they traversed the chamber, weaving between ancient wooden pillars. A circle of men and women who know the truth about Ravenhollow and help maintain the balance, Ezra explained, guiding her toward a heavy wooden door at the far end of the chamber. Some are shifters, others humans with special abilities or knowledge passed through their bloodlines. He paused, turning to face her fully, the lantern casting dramatic shadows across his features. Your father was invited to join, shortly before his death. This revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. My father knew? About all of this? Not everything, but enough to be dangerous to those who prefer secrecy. Ezra's expression darkened. He discovered ancient texts that confirmed the existence of shifters and seers, texts that mentioned the barrier between worlds and the creatures that seek to cross it. Eleanor struggled to reconcile this new information with the father she had known, a quiet, scholarly man who loved books and history. Had he truly been involved in a secret world of supernatural beings and ancient pacts? Is that why they killed him? Her voice trembled slightly. Because he knew too much? Because he was close to discovering who you truly are, Ezra corrected. Your heritage. The Shadow Council has hunted seers for generations, seeking to break the balance and release what lies beyond the veil. Before Eleanor could process this further, a distant howl echoed through the stone corridors behind them, followed by another, closer this time. Ezra tensed, his hand tightening around hers. They've found the passage, he said, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. We need to move. Now. They hurried to the wooden door. Ezra pressed his palm against an unmarked stone beside it, whispering words in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. The door swung open silently, revealing another tunnel beyond. This passage was different, rough-hewn from the living rock, more like a natural cave than a constructed corridor. The air smelled of earth and minerals, the ground uneven beneath their feet. They moved swiftly, Eleanor struggling to keep pace with Ezra's longer strides. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, not just howls now, but the scrape of claws on stone, the panting of large beasts moving at speed through the confined space. They've shifted, Ezra growled, his pace increasing. They'll move faster in wolf form. Can they track us by scent? Eleanor asked, breathless from their rapid pace. Yes, but I've planned for that. They reached a junction where a small underground stream cut across their path. Without hesitation, Ezra led her into the icy water, which rose to their ankles. They waded upstream for several yards before climbing out onto a rocky ledge on the opposite side. "The water will confuse their tracking," he explained. "It won't stop them, but it will slow them down." They continued through the winding tunnel, the sounds of pursuit temporarily fading behind them. The passage began to slope upward, and a faint breeze carried the crisp scent of pine and winter air. "We're approaching the exit," Ezra said. "When we emerge, we'll be in the northern forest, about half a mile from the castle walls." He stopped suddenly, holding up a hand for silence. Eleanor held her breath, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. At first, there was nothing but the soft dripping of water from the tunnel ceiling. Then she heard it, a low growl, coming not from behind them, but from somewhere ahead. "They've circled around," Ezra whispered, his voice tight with tension. "There are guards at the exit." "What do we do?" Eleanor asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Ezra was silent for a moment, his face unreadable in the dim light. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed the lantern and set it on a rocky outcrop. Next, he slipped the shirt over his head, revealing a torso sculpted by muscle and marked with several old scars, testament to battles fought and survived. "I need to shift," he said simply, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "It's the only way we'll get past them." Eleanor nodded, understanding washing over her. She had accepted the reality of what he was, what they were, but seeing the transformation would make it undeniably real. "What should I do?" she asked, steeling herself. "Turn around," he instructed, his hands moving to the fastening of his trousers. "Not from modesty. The transformation isn't pleasant to witness the first time." Eleanor obeyed, turning to face the darkness of the tunnel behind them. She heard the rustle of fabric as Ezra removed the rest of his clothing, followed by a tense silence. Then came the sounds, the crack of bones restructuring, the wet shifting of muscle and tissue rearranging beneath skin, the half-suppressed groans of pain that Ezra couldn't entirely contain. Eleanor closed her eyes tightly, her hands trembling within the folds of her cloak. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of deep, rhythmic breathing. Then she felt a warm presence behind her, the sensation of hot breath on her neck. Slowly, she turned to find herself staring into a pair of golden eyes. The wolf was massive, larger than any natural wolf she had ever seen, with powerful shoulders and dark gray fur that appeared almost silver in the lantern light. She immediately recognized the scar that ran down the right side of his muzzle, the same one Ezra carried in human form. "It's you," she whispered, a tremor of recognition running through her body, exactly as in her dreams. Wolf Ezra inclined his head, his intelligent eyes never leaving hers. He approached slowly, as if afraid of frightening her, until his muzzle nearly touched her hand. Instinctively, Eleanor raised her fingers and touched the spot between his eyes, feeling the softness of his fur and the pulsing warmth beneath. The moment she touched him, something happened. A wave of sensations washed through her, not her own, but his. Concern, protection, determination, and something deeper, more primal, a bond, a connection that transcended words. Eleanor pulled back her hand, startled by the intensity of the experience. Ezra retreated a step, then lowered himself, clearly indicating she should mount his back. She hesitated only briefly before the urgency of their situation pushed aside her uncertainty. As she settled between his powerful shoulders, the warmth from his body penetrated her clothes, an immediate shield against the cave's chill. His fur was surprisingly soft between her fingers as she found a secure grip. "I'm ready," she murmured. Without further hesitation, Ezra surged forward through the tunnel, his powerful legs carrying them at a pace that would have been impossible on foot. Eleanor pressed close against his back, her face partially buried in his fur to protect against the rush of cold air. They emerged from the tunnel into the silent winter forest. Moonlight filtered through the pine branches, casting blue-white patterns on the snow-covered ground. Ezra paused, ears alert, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, he veered sharply to the east, away from the path Eleanor had expected them to take. She understood why a moment later, when howls erupted from the tunnel entrance behind them. Shadows moved at the forest's edge. 4, perhaps 5 wolves, larger than natural animals, but smaller than Ezra's imposing form. The hunt had begun in earnest. Ezra raced through the forest, his paws finding purchase on the snowy ground with supernatural surety. Trees flashed past as they wove between ancient trunks and leapt fallen logs. Eleanor clung tightly, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm of his powerful strides. The pursuing wolves spread out, attempting to flank them. Their howls communicated positions and strategy in a language Eleanor couldn't understand, but somehow felt at the edges of her consciousness. 2 moved to intercept their path, while the others maintained direct pursuit. Ezra sensed the trap. He veered suddenly, charging up a steep embankment that the others would struggle to climb at speed. Snow and earth sprayed from beneath his paws as they crested the rise. Below them, the intercepting wolves scrambled to adjust their course. The forest thinned as they climbed higher into the mountains. Moonlight reflected brilliantly off the snow, illuminating their path as clearly as daylight. Eleanor's hands and face stung from the cold, but she hardly noticed, caught up in the wild exhilaration of their flight. A dark shape lunged from behind a boulder, directly into their path, a black wolf with eyes that glowed blood red in the moonlight. Ezra didn't slow. Instead, he charged directly at the attacker, veering at the last possible moment. The black wolf's teeth snapped shut on empty air as they passed. More howls echoed through the mountains, not just behind them now, but from other directions as well. The Shadow Council had mobilized all its forces. "They're surrounding us," Eleanor gasped, tightening her grip on Ezra's fur. He growled in acknowledgement, his pace increasing as they entered a narrow ravine. Sheer rock walls rose on either side, funneling them forward. Eleanor realized with growing dread that they were being herded, driven toward some predetermined location where more enemies likely waited. Ahead, the ravine opened into a clearing dominated by a massive stone formation, a natural arch of weathered granite, its surface etched with symbols barely visible in the moonlight. Beyond it, the mountain rose steeply, its upper reaches lost in swirling snow clouds. Ezra slowed as they approached the arch, his muscles tensing beneath Eleanor. The howls closed in from all sides, triumphant now, sensing their quarry trapped. "What do we do?" Eleanor whispered, fear gripping her heart as shadows appeared at the edges of the clearing, wolves emerging from the forest, circling slowly inward. Ezra's answer came not in words, but in action. He charged directly toward the stone arch, his powerful legs propelling them forward with renewed urgency. The circling wolves rushed to intercept, but they were too late. As they passed beneath the ancient stone, Eleanor felt a strange tingling wash over her skin. The air itself seemed to thicken and then part like a curtain. For a single disorienting moment, the world blurred around them. When her vision cleared, they were no longer in the same forest. The pursuing wolves skidded to a halt before the arch, growling and pacing, but making no move to follow. One particularly large wolf with russet fur transformed, the shift happening so quickly Eleanor barely registered the change before a tall, red-haired man stood naked in the snow, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he shouted, his voice carrying across the strange barrier that now separated them. "The seer will never complete the ritual. The veil will fall." Ezra didn't slow, continuing to carry Eleanor deeper into this new territory, a forest older and wilder than the one they had left behind. Ancient trees twisted toward the sky, their massive trunks wider than Eleanor's arms could encircle. Snow drifted between them, but the biting cold of the mountainside had diminished, replaced by a stillness that felt almost expectant. Only when they were well away from the stone arch did Ezra slow to a walk, his breathing heavy but controlled. Eleanor remained on his back, too overwhelmed by what she had witnessed to dismount. "What just happened?" she asked, though she knew he couldn't answer in this form. "Where are we?" They continued through the ancient forest for what seemed like hours, but might have been minutes. Time itself felt different here. The trees eventually thinned, giving way to a meadow cradled in the mountain's embrace. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, each twice the height of a man, carved with symbols similar to those on the arch they had passed through. Beyond the stone circle, built into the very face of the mountain, Eleanor glimpsed structures, dwellings constructed of stone and timber that blended so perfectly with the natural environment they seemed to have grown from the mountainside itself. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and lanterns glowed warmly in windows cut into the rock. Ezra stopped at the edge of the meadow. He lowered himself, allowing Eleanor to slide from his back. Her legs trembled as she stood, partly from the exertion of the ride, and partly from the overwhelming nature of everything she had experienced. She turned to look at Ezra, but he had already moved several paces away, his body tensed in preparation for the shift back to human form. "Should I turn away?" she asked. He made a sound somewhere between a growl and a whine, then nodded his massive head once. Eleanor averted her gaze, staring instead at the standing stones in the meadow's center. Behind her came the sounds of transformation, the cracking of bones and restructuring of muscle that had to be as painful as it was necessary. A gasp of completion, then the sound of labored breathing. "You can look now," Ezra's voice, rough from the transformation, called to her. She turned to find him kneeling in the snow, naked and vulnerable in the aftermath of the shift. Sweat glistened on his skin despite the cold, steam rising from his superheated body. Without hesitation, Eleanor removed the cloak he had given her and draped it around his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, standing slowly. The cloak barely covered his essential dignity, but he seemed unconcerned by his near-nakedness. "The first shift back is always the hardest." "What is this place?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to the settlement built into the mountainside. "The sanctuary," Ezra replied, wrapping the cloak more securely around himself. "The last refuge of the true guardians of Ravenhollow. It was built centuries ago, when the hunt for supernatural creatures intensified. A safe haven for those with the gift of transformation, and for the humans who protected them." "That man, the one who shouted after us, who was he?" Ezra's expression darkened. "Sebastian Harrington, Catherine's brother and alpha of their pack, a high-ranking member of the Shadow Council." "And the barrier we passed through, the stone arch?" "One of the ancient gateways," Ezra explained, beginning to walk toward the settlement. Eleanor fell into step beside him. "Created by the first seeress and maintained by her successors, it prevents those with harmful intent from entering the sacred ground." Eleanor processed this information as they approached the stone circle. Up close, she could see that each monolith was intricately carved with symbols, spirals, runes, and representations of animals, particularly ravens and wolves. At the center of the circle was a flat stone altar, its surface smooth and slightly concave, as if worn by centuries of use. "What happens here?" she asked, sensing the power that seemed to emanate from the ancient stones. "Rituals of renewal, ceremonies of bonding between alphas and their mates." Ezra's voice held a note of reverence. "And once every generation, the reaffirmation of the barrier that separates our world from what lies beyond." As they passed through the stone circle, Eleanor felt a subtle shift, a warmth that spread from the silver raven pendant at her throat throughout her body. The carvings on the standing stones seemed to shimmer briefly, responding to her presence. Ezra noticed her reaction. "They recognize you," he said softly. "The stones remember the touch of every seeress who has performed rituals here." Before Eleanor could respond, a figure emerged from one of the dwellings built into the mountainside, an elderly man leaning on an ornately carved walking stick. Despite his advanced years, he moved with surprising grace, his back straight and his steps sure. "You've returned," the old man called, his voice carrying clearly across the meadow, "and you've brought her at last." As they approached, Eleanor could see that the old man's eyes were a startling green, clear and sharp, missing nothing despite his age. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and he wore simple but well-made clothing that seemed both ancient and timeless in its design. "Master Victor Sullivan," Ezra introduced with a respectful inclination of his head. "The eldest of our historians and keeper of the old ways." Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition at the surname. Sullivan? Like Dr. Margaret Sullivan from the Castle Library? My cousin, Victor confirmed, his penetrating gaze assessing Eleanor from head to toe. Though she prefers to live among humans, maintaining her position as our eyes and ears in Ravenhollow. She's known all along, Eleanor realized, thinking of the cryptic comments and protective gestures her mentor had shown over the years. She's been watching over me. Protecting you, Victor corrected, keeping you safe until the time was right for your awakening. Other figures had begun to emerge from the stone dwellings, men and women of various ages, some dressed in simple clothing similar to Victor's, others wrapped in furs and leathers that spoke of a wilder existence. They gathered at a respectful distance, watching Eleanor with expressions ranging from curiosity to reverence. "They've been waiting for you," Ezra said quietly, "for the return of the seeress." Victor stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the raven pendant at Eleanor's throat. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the silver medallion. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before nodding. The old man reached out with gnarled fingers, gently lifting the pendant without removing it from her neck. He examined it closely, then released it with a satisfied nod. "The Ravenclaw medallion," he confirmed. "Passed from seeress to seeress since the founding days. I last saw this around the neck of Sophia Winters 75 years ago." "Winters?" Eleanor repeated, the surname striking a chord within her. "But my family name is Frost." "Names change over generations," Victor said with a knowing smile. "Particularly when one wishes to hide from those who would do harm. Your grandmother, I believe, was born a Winters before her marriage." Eleanor's mind raced. Her grandmother had indeed been born Elizabeth Winters before marrying into the Frost family. The pendant had come from her, a family heirloom passed down through generations of women. "The medallion is more than jewelry," Victor continued. "It is a key, a focus for your power, and a connection to those who came before you. In time, you will learn to use it to peer beyond the veil that separates the worlds." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Some made gestures that appeared to be signs of respect or protection. "Come," Victor said, turning toward the largest of the stone dwellings. "There is much to discuss, and you both need warmth and rest after your journey." The interior of Victor's dwelling was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. A fire burned brightly in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. Rugs woven in intricate patterns covered the floor, and comfortable furnishings made of wood and leather created a welcoming atmosphere. It reminded Eleanor somewhat of her parents' bookshop, a place of knowledge and hidden wisdom. A young woman appeared from a side room, carrying folded clothing which she presented to Ezra with a respectful bow. He thanked her and disappeared behind a screen to dress properly. When he emerged, he wore simple but well-made attire similar to Victor's, a loose shirt and trousers of undyed wool and soft leather boots. "Sit, both of you," Victor gestured to chairs arranged near the fire. "Mira will bring food and drink." Eleanor sank gratefully into the offered seat, exhaustion suddenly washing over her as the adrenaline of their escape faded. Ezra took the chair beside her, his presence reassuringly solid amidst the swirling uncertainty of her new reality. "I know you have questions," Victor said, lowering himself into a chair opposite them. "Many of them. And we have much to tell you about your heritage and the danger that now threatens us all." "Who am I?" Eleanor asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since Ezra's first revelations. "What am I?" Victor exchanged a glance with Ezra before answering. "You are the reborn essence of Freya Ravenclaw, the first seeress of our kind. She who formed the original pact with Fenrir Blackwood, the first Alpha, to create a barrier against the Soulbinders." "Soulbinders?" Eleanor repeated, the term sending an inexplicable chill down her spine. "Creatures from beyond the veil," Ezra explained, his voice low and tense. "Neither living nor dead, they feed on the life essence of humans and shifters alike. In the ancient days, before the barrier, they roamed freely, hunting and consuming until entire villages disappeared." Victor rose and moved to a bookshelf, retrieving an ancient tome bound in faded leather. He opened it carefully, revealing yellowed pages covered in handwritten text and detailed illustrations. He turned the book so Eleanor could see the images, twisted, shadowy figures with elongated limbs and eyes that seemed to glow red even in the ink drawing. "The soul binders cannot fully manifest in our world without assistance," Victor continued. "The barrier created by Freya prevents them from crossing over, but they can influence those who listen, those who seek power at any cost." "The Shadow Council," Eleanor said, understanding dawning. "They're working with these creatures?" "Some willingly, believing the soulbinders will grant them power and dominion," Ezra confirmed. "Others unwittingly, manipulated through dreams and whispered promises. Either way, they seek to break the barrier permanently." "And I'm supposed to stop this?" Eleanor laughed without humor, the weight of expectations settling like a stone in her chest. "I'm a librarian's assistant. I catalog books and repair damaged bindings. I know nothing about magical barriers or ancient pacts." "You know more than you realize," Victor said gently. "The knowledge is within you, buried beneath layers of forgetting that occur with each rebirth. The seeress's soul carries the memories of all her lives, though they must be awakened." The young woman, Mira, returned with a tray bearing steaming mugs and a platter of bread and cheese. She set it on a low table between them, then retreated silently. "Drink," Victor encouraged, indicating the mugs. "Herbs to restore strength and clear the mind." Eleanor took a cautious sip. The liquid was bitter but not unpleasant, with undertones of mint and something earthier she couldn't identify. Warmth spread through her body as she drank, easing the ache in her muscles from the long ride. "The passage through the gateway may have started the awakening process already," Victor observed, studying her face. "Have you experienced any unusual sensations? Flashes of memory that don't seem to be your own?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "When we passed beneath the arch, I saw images. A woman performing some kind of ritual in the stone circle outside. People gathered around her, some in wolf form, and when I touched the Ezra in his wolf form, I felt his emotions, his thoughts." Victor and Ezra exchanged significant looks. "The connection is forming naturally," the old man said with evident satisfaction. "Faster than I would have expected." "What connection?" Eleanor asked, looking between them. "The bond between Sirius and Alpha," Ezra explained, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "It is more than a political alliance or even a personal relationship. It is a sharing of essence, of power and perception. Each strengthens the other." "In the old traditions," Victor added, "the Alpha provides the physical strength and protection that allows the Seeress to work her magic safely. In return, the Seeress grants the Alpha control over his transformations and a deeper connection to his human side." "And without this bond?" Eleanor asked. Victor's expression grew solemn. "Without a Seeress to balance him, an Alpha gradually loses control. The beast takes over, bit by bit, until the man is lost entirely. And without an Alpha's strength, a Seeress cannot channel enough power to maintain the barrier." Eleanor looked at Ezra, suddenly understanding the tension she had seen in him, the careful control he maintained at all times. "Is that happening to you? Are you losing control?" Ezra's jaw tightened. "It's been 5 years since my father died, 5 years without the balancing influence of a Seeress. The wolf grows stronger each moon cycle. I can still master it, but the struggle becomes harder." "Your father had a bond with a Seeress? Who—" "My mother," Ezra said quietly. "She was the last fully awakened Seeress before you. When she died, my father managed to maintain control through sheer force of will, but it took its toll. He was searching for the next Seeress, for you, when he was killed." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "Your mother was a Seeress? But you said she was human." "All seers are human," Victor interjected. "That is their strength and their vulnerability. They stand between worlds, able to perceive and interact with both, but without the physical resilience of shifters. My mother was murdered by agents of the Shadow Council," Ezra continued, his voice tight with old pain. "I was 8 years old. I found her body in her private garden, her throat torn out by what appeared to be a wolf attack. but no natural wolf could have breached the castle defenses. It was Sebastian Harrington's father, Victor added grimly. He believed that eliminating the seeress would weaken the barrier enough for the soulbinders to communicate more directly with our world. And your father? Eleanor asked gently. Poisoned, slowly, over months. Ezra's hands clenched into fists. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. But he managed to meet with your father one last time, to warn him about you, to give him the journal that would help protect you. Eleanor thought of the leather-bound journal Ezra had shown her in his chambers, filled with her father's observations about her unusual abilities. And then my parents died in the fire. It was set by Catherine and Sebastian's uncle, Roland Harrington, Ezra confirmed, but he underestimated your father's foresight. The most important documents had already been hidden, including the journal, and you were safely away from the house when they struck. All these deaths, all this manipulation and murder. To what end? Eleanor asked, struggling to comprehend the scope of the conspiracy. What do they gain by destroying the barrier? Power, Victor said simply. The soulbinders promise unlimited power to those who free them, the ability to control life and death itself, to rule over humans and shifters alike. It is a lie, of course. Once freed, the soulbinders would consume everything in their path, including their supposed allies. But some, like Sebastian, truly believe they can control these entities, Ezra added. Others simply want to return shifters to what they see as their natural state, wild, unfettered by human laws or conscience. They believe the connection with humans has weakened us, made us less than what we should be. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the wind had risen, whistling around the stone dwelling with mournful intensity. And now they know who I am, Eleanor said quietly. They'll never stop hunting me. No, Ezra agreed. They won't. Not until the ritual of bonding is complete and the barrier is strengthened beyond their ability to breach it. The ritual? Eleanor's gaze moved between Ezra and Victor. What exactly does this ritual entail? Victor rose from his chair with a soft grunt, moving to another bookshelf. He returned with a smaller volume bound in red leather, its cover embossed with the now familiar symbols of raven and wolf intertwined. The ritual of binding is as old as our kind, he said, placing the book in Eleanor's hands. It must be performed during the full moon, in the sacred circle. It involves the sharing of blood between Sirius and Alpha, the recitation of the ancient vows, and the channeling of power through the Ravenclaw medallion. Eleanor opened the book, her fingers tracing the handwritten text on the first page, a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. And after this ritual, what then? What becomes of me? Of us? Her eyes lifted to Ezra's. That depends on the nature of your bond, Victor said cryptically. Each pairing of Sirius and Alpha is unique. Some are bound as protector and protected, others as partners in leadership, still others as lovers, Ezra finished when Victor trailed off. His gaze never left Eleanor's face. The strongest bonds have always been between those whose connection transcends the merely functional. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks, but she didn't look away. Something stirred within her at his words, a recognition that went beyond their brief acquaintance, beyond logic or reason, as if her soul remembered his across lifetimes. The full moon is 3 nights from now, Victor said, breaking the charged silence that had fallen between them. You have until then to prepare, to begin awakening the memories and powers that lie dormant within you. And if I refuse? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. If I choose not to participate in this ritual, then the barrier will continue to weaken, Ezra said softly. The soulbinders will find more ways to influence our world. People will die, humans and shifters alike, and eventually the barrier will fail completely. No pressure, then, Eleanor murmured, attempting humor despite the gravity of the situation. A small smile touched Ezra's lips, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard angles of his face and making him appear younger, almost boyish. You have a choice, Eleanor, he said, with unexpected gentleness. There is always a choice. I won't force you into a bond you don't want, regardless of the consequences. Victor cleared his throat. It's late, and you've both endured much today. Eleanor needs rest if she's to begin her training tomorrow. Training? Eleanor asked. To awaken your abilities, Victor explained. Meditation, memory recovery, learning to use the medallion to focus your sight. The process normally takes months or years, but we must accelerate it given the circumstances. He rose, gesturing toward a door at the rear of the main room. I've prepared a chamber for you. It once belonged to your predecessor, Sophia. Perhaps being surrounded by her possessions will help stimulate your memories. Eleanor stood, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled into her body. The events of the day, from the festival to their wild escape, had drained her completely. Thank you, she said sincerely, for everything. For protecting me all these years, even when I didn't know I needed protection. Victor bowed his head in acknowledgement. It has been the purpose of the Sullivan family for generations, to watch over the Cirrus line, to preserve the knowledge she would need when she returned. Eleanor turned to Ezra, who had also risen from his chair. And thank you for saving me tonight, for risking yourself to bring me here safely. I would risk far more for you, Eleanor Frost, he replied, his voice dropping to that low register that seemed to resonate directly with something primal within her. Rest now. Tomorrow begins your true awakening. As Eleanor followed Victor toward her chamber, she couldn't help glancing back at Ezra, who stood watching her by the firelight. In that moment, silhouetted against the dancing flames, he appeared both human and other, the perfect embodiment of the dual nature that defined him. Eleanor knew that when she closed her eyes tonight, it would be his face she would see in her dreams, and perhaps, for the first time, she would understand the meaning of the wolves that had haunted her sleep for as long as she could remember. Eleanor woke to the sound of birdsong filtering through a small window cut into the stone wall. For a moment, she lay disoriented, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Rough-hewn rock draped with tapestries depicting forest scenes and night skies filled with stars. Memory flooded back in a rush. The festival, Catherine's cruel humiliation, Ezra's unexpected protection, their wild escape through the forest, and finally, the revelation of her true heritage. She sat up slowly, taking in the chamber that had once belonged to Sophia Winters, the previous seeress. The room was small but comfortable, furnished with simple elegance, a bed covered in furs, a wooden chest at its foot, a writing desk beneath the window, and bookshelves lining one wall. Everything spoke of a scholarly life, not unlike Eleanor's own, yet infused with an unmistakable connection to nature and the old ways. A silver basin and pitcher stood on a small table, the water within still steaming slightly. Beside it lay folded clothing, not the modern attire she was accustomed to, but something that resembled the garments Victor and the other sanctuary dwellers wore. A simple dress of undyed linen, soft leather boots, and a shawl woven with subtle patterns that reminded Eleanor of moonlight on water. As she washed and dressed, Eleanor's fingers kept returning to the raven pendant at her throat. It felt different now, warmer, almost alive against her skin. The weight of centuries seemed to hang from the silver chain, the accumulated knowledge and power of all the seers who had worn it before her. The door opened after a soft knock, revealing Mira, the young woman who had served them the previous night. She carried a tray with bread, fruit, and a steaming mug of herbal tea. "Good morning, Lady Seeress," she said, setting the tray on the desk. "Master Victor asks that you join him in the grove after you've eaten. I'm to show you the way." "Thank you, Mira," Eleanor replied, still uncomfortable with the reverent title. "But please, call me Eleanor." The young woman smiled, revealing dimples in her round cheeks. "As you wish, though others may not be so informal. Your return has been prophesied for generations. Many here have waited their entire lives to serve the seeress who would strengthen the barrier once more." Eleanor sighed, the weight of expectation settling heavily on her shoulders. "I'm not sure I'm the person they've been waiting for." "The medallion chose you," Mira said simply, as if this settled the matter. And Lord Blackwood recognized your spirit. That is enough for most here." After a simple but nourishing breakfast, Eleanor followed Mira through the sanctuary. In daylight, she could better appreciate the unique construction of the settlement, a seamless blend of natural caverns and human artifice built directly into the mountainside. Terraced gardens grew hardy vegetables and herbs despite the winter season, warmed by hot springs that bubbled up through the rocky soil. People moved about their daily tasks, most pausing to bow respectfully as Eleanor passed. They exited through an archway carved with ravens in flight and followed a path that wound through a grove of ancient oak trees. Despite the snow that blanketed the surrounding mountains, this sheltered valley remained temperate, protected by some combination of natural features and what Eleanor now understood to be the magic of generations of seers. At the center of the grove stood a massive oak, its trunk wider than 3 men standing with arms outstretched. Beneath its sprawling branches, Victor Sullivan sat cross-legged on a flat stone, eyes closed in apparent meditation. Before him rested a small altar stone bearing various objects: a silver bowl filled with clear water, a white candle, a handful of smooth river stones, and a leather-bound book. "Master Victor," Mira called softly, "I've brought the seeress." The old man's eyes opened, their vivid green startling against his weathered face. "Thank you, Mira. You may leave us now." As the young woman departed, Victor gestured to a space on the stone across from him. "Sit, Eleanor. We have much to accomplish before the full moon." Eleanor settled onto the cool stone surface, arranging her skirts around her. "I still don't understand what's expected of me. How am I supposed to access memories from past lives I don't remember living?" "The memories are there," Victor assured her, "locked within your soul. The medallion is the key to accessing them." He indicated the raven pendant at her throat. "It contains fragments of each seeress who wore it, preserved through a binding ritual performed at the moment of death. When a seeress felt her end approaching, she would infuse the medallion with her essential knowledge and power, ensuring it would pass to her successor." "And Sophia Winters was the last to do this?" Victor nodded, a shadow of old grief passing across his face. "I was there, 75 years ago. I was a young man then, barely 20, but already trained in the old ways. Sophia was in her 90s, frail in body, but powerful in spirit. She knew the Shadow Council had prevented any new seeress from awakening for decades. She feared she would be the last." He paused, his gaze distant with memory. "Her final words were a prophecy. 'Seek me when the raven sings to the full moon. The bloodlines will converge, and the veil will be tested as never before.'" "What does that mean?" Eleanor asked. "We believe it referred to your birth, to the joining of the Frost and Winter's bloodlines, both descended from the original Ravenclaw family, and to this time of crisis, when the barrier between worlds has grown dangerously thin." Victor reached for the silver bowl of water and placed it before Eleanor. "Now, we begin your awakening. Take the medallion in your hand and look into the water. Focus on the reflection of the pendant and open your mind to what it contains." Eleanor hesitated, then slipped the chain over her head, holding the silver raven in her palm. She leaned forward, gazing into the still water where the medallion's reflection shimmered with unexpected clarity. At first, she saw nothing but silver metal against the dark water. Then, gradually, the reflection began to change, the water rippling without being touched, colors swirling beneath its surface. "What do you see?" Victor's voice seemed to come from far away. "Colors," Eleanor whispered. "Movement, like looking through a window into somewhere else." The swirling colors coalesced into images: a woman with golden hair standing in the stone circle she had seen upon arriving at the sanctuary. The woman raised her hands toward the full moon, her lips moving in words Eleanor couldn't hear. Around her circled massive wolves, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Beyond the circle of protection, shadows gathered, formless entities with glowing red eyes that pressed against some invisible barrier, seeking entrance. "Freya," Eleanor breathed, somehow knowing this was the first seeress, the original bearer of the medallion. She's performing a ritual to strengthen the barrier against the soul binders. More images followed in rapid succession, different women in different times, each wearing the raven medallion, each standing within the stone circle beneath the full moon. Sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by a male figure Eleanor instinctively recognized as that generation's alpha. The clothing and details changed, but the essence of the ritual remained constant. Blood shared, vows spoken, power channeled through the medallion to reinforce the invisible wall between worlds. Then came a scene Eleanor recognized from her own dreams, the forest clearing, moonlight on snow, wolves circling protectively. But now she saw more clearly the woman at the center, Sophia Winters in her prime, her silver-streaked hair flowing loose around her shoulders as she worked her magic. Beside her stood a man with Ezra's bearing but older features. His father, she realized, the previous alpha. The vision shifted again, showing Sophia much older, lying on a bed similar to the one Eleanor had slept in. The elderly seeress clutched the medallion in withered hands, whispering words of power as the silver began to glow with inner light. A younger Victor stood nearby, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the ritual of transference. "Protect the medallion!" Sophia's voice came clearly now, as if speaking directly to Eleanor across time. "The next seeress will need it when the convergence comes. The bloodlines must unite once more." Eleanor gasped as the connection broke, the water in the bowl returning to normal. She looked up to find Victor watching her intently, his expression a mixture of hope and concern. "You saw her," he said. Not a question. Sophia, and others before her. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she replaced the medallion around her neck. "I saw the ritual, repeated through generations. Always the same purpose, to strengthen the barrier against the soul binders." "What else did you see?" "A warning about convergence, about bloodlines uniting." She frowned, trying to make sense of the fragments she'd glimpsed. "Something is different this time, isn't it? The ritual I'm expected to perform with Ezra. It's not just a renewal of the barrier." Victor sighed heavily. "You perceive much already. Yes, this time is different. The barrier has weakened more than ever before, partly due to the long gap between Sophia's death and your awakening. But there's more." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The soul binders have grown stronger, finding ways to influence our world even through the weakened barrier. They've been gathering allies among both humans and shifters, particularly those from the Harrington bloodline. Catherine and Sebastian, and others before them. Their family has opposed the Blackwood leadership for generations, believing shifters should embrace their animal nature completely and reject human civilization. The Soulbinders exploited this philosophy, twisting it to serve their own ends." Eleanor recalled the red-haired man who had shouted threats as they escaped through the stone arch. Sebastian Harrington had seemed consumed by a rage that went beyond political disagreement, a fanaticism that bordered on madness. "What exactly will the ritual require of me?" she asked, returning to the immediate concern. "I saw blood shared in the visions, vows spoken. But what does it mean for Ezra and me afterward?" Victor's gaze was steady. "The bond between Sirius and Alpha is profound. Once formed, it cannot be broken except by death. You will share aspects of yourselves. He will gain some of your sensitivity to the spiritual world. You will gain some of his physical resilience. You will be able to sense each other's emotions, sometimes even thoughts, particularly in moments of danger." "And personally, what will we be to each other?" "That depends on the nature of your connection," Victor replied. "The bond does not dictate feelings, though it often deepens whatever exists between the pair. Some pairs in history were lovers, others more like siblings in their affection. A few maintained a purely formal alliance." A slight smile crossed his weathered face, though those bonds tended to be the weakest. Eleanor thought of Ezra, his fierce protection, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, the strange familiarity she felt in his presence, despite having barely known him before yesterday. Already, something pulled her toward him that defied rational explanation. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though with less conviction than before. "If I choose not to complete this ritual?" Then the barrier will continue to weaken, Victor said gravely. More soulbinders will find ways to influence our world, and Ezra, he paused. Without the balancing influence of Osiris, he will eventually lose himself to the wolf. It may take years, but the outcome is inevitable. Every alpha needs a Cirrus to maintain their humanity, just as every Cirrus needs an alpha to ground their power in the physical world. The weight of this knowledge settled over Eleanor like a mantle. Not just the fate of Ravenhollow, but Ezra's very soul hung in the balance. The responsibility felt overwhelming, yet somehow right, as if she had been preparing for this role her entire life without knowing it. "What must I do to prepare?" she asked, her decision made even if she wasn't yet ready to voice it aloud. Relief visibly washed over Victor's features. "First, you must continue awakening the memories and knowledge stored within the medallion. Then learn to access your innate abilities, the sight that allows you to perceive beyond the veil, and the power to strengthen the barrier." He indicated the objects on the altar stone between them. "We'll use these tools to focus your mind and spirit. Water for scrying, as you've just experienced. Fire for purification. Stone for grounding. And the book contains the ancient words you'll need to speak during the ritual." For the rest of the morning, Eleanor practiced the techniques Victor patiently taught her, focusing her mind through meditation, channeling energy through the medallion, and reciting phrases in a language that felt strangely familiar to her tongue, despite never having learned it. With each exercise, more fragments of memory surfaced, knowledge and experiences from previous incarnations of the Cirrus flickering through her consciousness like pages in a book riffled by the wind. By midday, exhaustion had settled into Eleanor's bones, a bone-deep weariness that came from using mental and spiritual muscles long dormant. Victor noticed her fatigue and called a halt to their practice. "You've done well for your first session," he said approvingly. "The connection to the medallion is already stronger than I expected. Sophia chose wisely when she directed it to your bloodline." They walked back toward the settlement in companionable silence. Eleanor's mind whirled with all she had learned, both the explicit teachings Victor had imparted and the implicit knowledge that had begun filtering through from the medallion's stored memories. As they approached the main gathering area, Eleanor noticed increased activity, people moving with purpose, several men and women checking weapons and speaking in low, urgent tones. Near the largest dwelling, Ezra stood deep in conversation with 3 other men, his expression grim as he studied what appeared to be a map spread on a table before them. He looked up as Eleanor and Victor approached, his intense blue eyes finding hers immediately. Something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that seemed to strengthen with each encounter. "What's happening?" Victor asked, sensing the tension in the air. "Scouts have reported movement in the lower valleys," Ezra replied, his voice taut with controlled anger. "The Shadow Council is mobilizing. Sebastian has called in allies from neighboring territories." "So soon?" Victor frowned. "They must have been preparing for this confrontation for some time." "They've been waiting for Eleanor to reveal herself," Ezra confirmed. "The moment I protected her publicly at the festival, their plans accelerated." He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. "How was your first training session?" "Illuminating," she answered, still processing everything she had experienced. "Overwhelming." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I remember my own training after my father died, having to learn in weeks what should have taken years." The smile faded. "Unfortunately, we may have even less time than I thought." "What have the scouts discovered?" Victor asked, studying the map. Ezra pointed to several locations marked with small stones. Harrington allies arriving from the south and east. At least 3 other Alpha bloodlines have joined their cause. They're establishing camps here, here, and here, effectively surrounding Ravenhollow. "The townspeople," Eleanor said with sudden concern. "Are they in danger?" "Not yet," Ezra assured her. "Sebastian is too cunning for outright violence against humans that might draw outside attention. But they're placing their people in strategic positions throughout the town, Doctor." Sullivan sent word this morning. "Catherine has been visiting influential families, spreading rumors about your disappearance and my supposed role in it." "Building support for a challenge to your leadership," Victor murmured. "Precisely." Ezra's jaw tightened. Sebastian intends to call for a formal challenge at the next council meeting. If I refuse, I'll appear weak. If I accept, I'll be forced to leave Eleanor unprotected during the combat. A challenge? Eleanor looked between the two men. What does that entail? Trial by combat, Victor explained grimly. An ancient tradition among shifters. One alpha challenging another for control of territory and pack, fought in wolf form to the death. Eleanor felt a chill run through her at the matter-of-fact description. And you would have to accept? According to the old laws, yes, Ezra confirmed. An alpha who refuses a formal challenge loses standing immediately. My pack would be forced to submit to the challenger or become outcasts. There must be another way, Eleanor insisted, the thought of Ezra fighting to the death with Sebastian filling her with dread. What about the ritual? If we complete it before the challenge is issued. That was my thought as well, Ezra nodded. Once the ritual strengthens the barrier, Sebastian's connection to the Soulbinders will be weakened. He may lose support from some of his allies who are only following him due to supernatural influence. Can we move up the ritual? Eleanor asked. Does it have to be performed on the full moon? Victor stroked his beard thoughtfully. The full moon provides optimal conditions, when the veil between worlds is naturally thinnest, and a seeress can most easily manipulate it. But there are accounts of emergency rituals performed during other lunar phases. He fixed Eleanor with a penetrating gaze. However, such rituals require greater power from the seeress, more complete access to the memories and abilities of previous incarnations. You would need to accelerate your awakening dramatically. How? Eleanor asked without hesitation. There is a process, Victor said reluctantly. A purification and vision quest using herbs from the sanctuary gardens. It would force open the channels between your conscious mind and the stored memories in the medallion. But it carries risks, disorientation, temporary loss of self, even physical trauma if the awakening is too sudden. Is there any other option? She looked to Ezra, whose expression had darkened at Victor's description. I won't risk your safety, he said firmly. And I won't risk yours by delay, Eleanor countered with equal determination. She turned back to Victor. Prepare whatever is needed for this vision quest. If accelerating my awakening gives us an advantage against the Shadow Council, then the risk is worth taking. Victor exchanged a long look with Ezra, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I'll gather the necessary elements. The ritual should be performed at twilight, when day and night balance each other. As Victor departed to make preparations, Eleanor found herself alone with Ezra for the first time since their arrival at the sanctuary. He studied her face with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable just days ago, but now felt natural, right, somehow. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. The vision quest Victor described, it's not a simple trance or meditation. It will force you to confront every incarnation of the seeress at once. The experience has driven some initiates mad in the past. I'm stronger than I look, Eleanor replied, lifting her chin slightly. I survived losing my parents. I survived years of Catherine's cruelty. I'll survive this too. Ezra moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, that supernatural warmth all shifters seemed to possess. Why? He asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Why risk yourself for this? For me? You barely know me. The question gave Eleanor pause. Why indeed was she so willing to endanger herself for this cause, for this man she had truly known for less than 2 days? Logic dictated caution, skepticism. Yet something deeper than logic drove her decisions now, something that resonated in her very bones. I've dreamed of wolves my entire life, she said finally, holding his gaze. I've felt drawn to the mountains, to the forests, even when I'd never set foot in them. I've touched objects and seen visions no one else could perceive. All my life, I've been told these things made me strange, different, perhaps even mad. She placed her hand over the raven medallion at her throat. But now I understand they make me who I am meant to be. For the first time, I feel like I'm not running from my nature, but embracing it. Her words seemed to affect Ezra deeply. His eyes, normally so guarded, revealed a complex mixture of emotions, hope, fear, and something more primal that made her heart beat faster. "After my mother died," he said slowly, "I dreamed of a woman with golden hair who walked between worlds. My father said it was the bond calling to me, preparing me for my future role as Alpha." His hand rose, hesitating just short of touching her face. "When I saw you in the library that first day, so focused on the ancient texts, I knew. Something in me recognized you immediately. Yet you kept your distance," Eleanor observed. "Watched from afar." "I had to be certain," he admitted, "and I needed to protect you until you were ready. The Shadow Council has spies everywhere in Ravenhollow. If they had confirmed your identity too soon, they would have eliminated me before I could awaken my powers," she finished for him. Ezra nodded grimly. "I couldn't risk approaching you directly, so I arranged for Dr. Sullivan to offer you the position in the library, where I could ensure your safety without drawing attention." Eleanor's eyes widened as connections suddenly formed in her mind. "You orchestrated my employment at the castle? But I thought it was charity after my parents' death." "Never charity," Ezra said firmly. "Recognition of your value and your rightful place. The library has always been under the protection of the seeress. It contains knowledge meant for your eyes." This revelation shifted Eleanor's understanding of the past 3 years. What she had perceived as pity from Dr. Sullivan had actually been part of a larger plan to protect her and prepare her for this role. It should have made her angry, this manipulation of her life, yet she found she couldn't summon resentment. In a strange way, it felt like destiny unfolding as it should. "The Vision Quest," she said, returning to the immediate concern. "What should I expect?" Ezra's expression grew serious once more. "According to the accounts I've read, you will journey through the collective memories of all previous seers. You may experience their lives, their deaths, their most powerful rituals. The challenge will be maintaining your sense of self, remembering that you are Eleanor Frost, not just a vessel for these past incarnations." "And afterward, if I succeed?" "If all goes well, you will retain your identity but gain access to their knowledge and abilities. You will truly become the seeress in more than just potential." Eleanor nodded, absorbing this information with growing resolution. "And the ritual with you, the bonding, it could be performed sooner than the full moon?" "If your powers are fully awakened, yes," Ezra confirmed. "Though it would still be best performed at night, when the veil thins naturally." "Tomorrow night, then," Eleanor decided, "assuming the Vision Quest succeeds today." Ezra seemed about to object, then reconsidered. "Your courage continues to surprise me, Eleanor Frost." There was admiration in his voice, and something else, a warmth that spread through her more effectively than any fire. Before she could respond, one of the scouts approached, his expression urgent. "Lord Blackwood, we've spotted movement at the eastern boundary. 3 wolves testing the perimeter of the sanctuary's protection." Ezra's demeanor shifted instantly, the brief moment of personal connection replaced by the focused alertness of an alpha protecting his territory. "Show me," he commanded, already moving to follow the scout. He paused, looking back at Eleanor. "Rest before the Vision Quest. You'll need your strength." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Be careful, Eleanor." "If I lost you now—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Eleanor felt the weight of his concern, his caring, as tangibly as if he'd spoken it aloud. Something was forming between them, something that transcended their formal roles as Seeress and Alpha, something both ancient and new. "I'll be careful," she promised, "but you must be as well. The ritual requires both of us." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then we both have reason to survive the coming trials." As Ezra strode away with the scout, Eleanor watched his retreating figure with a curious mixture of emotions. In just 2 days, her entire world had transformed. Her identity, her purpose, her future, all redefined by revelations that should have seemed fantastical, but somehow felt like truth finally revealed. She touched the raven medallion at her throat, feeling its subtle warmth against her fingertips. Within its silver confines lay the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who had walked this path before her, women who had faced their own trials and fears, their own moments of doubt. "Guide me," she whispered to them across the veil of time. "Show me how to be worthy of this legacy." As if in answer, the medallion pulsed once with warmth, and deep in her mind, Eleanor felt something stir, ancient memories beginning to awaken, preparing for the vision quest that would either complete her transformation into the seeress or break her completely. The choice had been made. The path lay before her. All that remained was the courage to walk it. Twilight descended over the sanctuary, painting the stone buildings in hues of amber and violet. Eleanor stood at the entrance to a small cave tucked behind the sacred grove, watching as Victor Sullivan made final preparations for the vision quest. The elderly keeper had spent the afternoon gathering rare herbs and crystals, arranging them meticulously around a shallow stone basin at the center of the cave floor. The space was illuminated by oil lamps that cast flickering shadows against walls adorned with ancient paintings, wolves running beneath a full moon, ravens soaring above mountains, and human figures with outstretched arms channeling what appeared to be streams of light from the sky. Eleanor recognized the imagery from her brief glimpses into the medallion's memories earlier that day. These cave paintings date back to the time of Freya, the first seeress, Victor explained, noticing Eleanor's interest. This chamber has been used for awakening rituals for countless generations. The very walls are saturated with the power of those who came before you. Eleanor touched the rough stone surface, fingers tracing the outline of a painted raven. "Did every seeress undergo this accelerated awakening?" "No," Victor admitted, crushing dried leaves into a fine powder with a stone mortar and pestle. "Most had the luxury of gradual training, sometimes beginning in childhood when the signs of their abilities first appeared. The vision quest was traditionally reserved for emergencies, when a seeress died unexpectedly and her successor needed to awaken quickly." "Like now," Eleanor murmured. "The circumstances are somewhat different," Victor corrected. "Sophia had time to prepare for her passing, to infuse the medallion with her knowledge. The crisis now is not her death, which occurred decades ago, but the unprecedented strength the soul-binders have gained during the gap between seers." Eleanor nodded, her hand moving unconsciously to the raven pendant at her throat. The silver felt unnaturally warm against her skin, as though responding to the sacred space around them. "Will Ezra be here for the ritual?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Victor glanced up from his work, a knowing look in his vivid green eyes. The presence of the Alpha can help anchor a seeress during her journey through the memories, but it also creates its own complications. He hesitated. "The bond between you has already begun forming, even without the formal ritual. During the vision quest, that nascent connection may intensify in unpredictable ways." "Is that dangerous?" "Not physically," Victor said carefully, "but emotionally, spiritually. Yes, there are risks. You might experience his memories alongside those of the previous seers. Your identities could become temporarily entangled, and the attraction between seeress and alpha, always powerful, may become overwhelming before you're prepared to address it." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks at the blunt assessment. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Ezra, something far deeper than physical attraction, though that element certainly existed. It was as though some part of her soul recognized him, yearned for him, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. "I'm willing to take that risk," she said firmly. "Having him here might provide the stability I need to maintain my sense of self through this process." Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. He should return from patrolling the perimeter soon. We'll wait for him before beginning." As if summoned by their conversation, Ezra appeared at the cave entrance. He had changed from the simple clothing he had worn earlier into more formal attire, a deep blue tunic embroidered with silver threads that formed subtle patterns reminiscent of the symbols carved on the sanctuary's standing stones. The garment enhanced the intensity of his blue eyes, which immediately sought and found Eleanor's across the cave. "The eastern boundary is secure," he reported to Victor, though his gaze remained fixed on Eleanor. 4 of Sebastian's scouts tested the barrier, but retreated when challenged. They seemed to be probing for weaknesses, rather than attempting a direct assault. "A wise strategy," Victor acknowledged. "The sanctuary's protections have held for centuries, but nothing is impenetrable. Especially now, with the barrier between worlds weakening." Ezra moved further into the cave, his presence seeming to fill the space with an almost tangible energy. "Are the preparations complete?" he asked, looking at the elaborate arrangement of herbs, crystals, and symbols Victor had created around the stone basin. "Nearly so," the older man replied. "We await only the proper alignment of twilight, the moment when day and night balance perfectly." Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach as the reality of what she was about to attempt fully registered. She would be opening her mind completely to the experiences of women who had lived and died over centuries, absorbing their memories, their knowledge, and perhaps even aspects of their personalities. The potential for losing herself in that flood of foreign consciousness was very real. "Second thoughts?" Ezra asked quietly, moving to stand beside her. "Healthy concern," Eleanor corrected with a faint smile. "This morning I was a librarian's assistant with unusual dreams. Tonight I'm preparing to channel the collective memories of generations of mystic women to help fight interdimensional soul-eating monsters. It's a significant career change." Unexpectedly, Ezra laughed, a warm, rich sound that Eleanor realized she had never heard from him before. The transformation was remarkable, softening the harsh planes of his face and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the weight of responsibility he carried. "Your ability to maintain humor in these circumstances is remarkable," he said, admiration evident in his tone. "Most would be paralyzed by fear or disbelief." "Oh, I've experienced both," Eleanor assured him, "but neither emotion seems particularly useful at the moment." Before Ezra could respond, Victor approached them, holding a small wooden cup filled with a dark liquid that emitted a pungent herbal aroma. "It is time," he announced solemnly. "The balance point of twilight has arrived." Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. "What should I do?" "Remove your shoes and sit at the edge of the basin," Victor instructed. "The water within has been gathered from the sacred spring deep beneath the sanctuary. It will serve as both mirror and gateway for your journey." Eleanor did as directed, settling cross-legged before the stone basin. The water within was perfectly still, reflecting the flickering lamplight like a dark mirror. Victor knelt on the opposite side, while Ezra positioned himself slightly behind Eleanor, close enough that she could feel the reassuring heat of his presence. "First you must drink this," Victor said, offering the wooden cup. "It contains herbs that will open your mind to the medallion's influence, allowing the memories of past seers to flow more freely into your consciousness." Eleanor accepted the cup, inhaling the strange aroma, earthy and sharp, with undertones of sweetness and spice. "All of it?" "Every drop," Victor confirmed, "and quickly, before the potency fades." With a final glance at Ezra, who nodded encouragement, Eleanor raised the cup to her lips and drank the liquid in 3 long swallows. The taste was bitter but not unpleasant, reminiscent of strong tea mixed with honey and unfamiliar spices. For several moments, nothing happened. Then a wave of warmth spread from her stomach throughout her body, followed by a curious lightness in her limbs. The cave around her seemed to sharpen in detail, the colors of the wall paintings becoming more vivid, the flickering shadows cast by the lamps taking on depth and texture she hadn't noticed before. "Now remove the medallion and hold it over the water," Victor instructed, his voice sounding strangely distant despite his proximity. Eleanor slipped the silver chain from around her neck, clutching the raven pendant in her palm. It pulsed with warmth, almost like a tiny heartbeat against her skin. Following Victor's guidance, she held it suspended above the still water of the basin. "Focus on the reflection," he continued. "See not the silver metal, but what lies within it. The medallion is not merely a symbol, it is a vessel containing fragments of every seeress who wore it before you." Eleanor stared into the water, watching as the medallion's reflection rippled and shifted despite the perfect stillness of the actual pendant in her hand. The silver seemed to melt and reform in the reflection, becoming a window through which other scenes, other times began to emerge. Open yourself to them. Victor's voice came as if from a great distance. Do not resist the memories, but neither lose yourself within them. You are Eleanor Frost, the current vessel of the Cirrus legacy, not merely an echo of those who came before. The raven medallion in her hand grew painfully hot, then seemed to pulse with light that somehow remained invisible to the physical eye while blazing clearly in her mind. Eleanor gasped as the first wave of foreign memories washed over her, not fragmented glimpses like she had experienced that morning, but complete sensory immersions that pulled her consciousness away from the cave and into another time, another life. She was Freya Ravenclaw, standing beneath a full moon in a forest clearing, the taste of her own blood metallic on her tongue as she sealed the first pact with Fenrir Blackwood, the massive black wolf who circled her protectively while shadowy entities with glowing red eyes pressed against the barrier she was creating through sheer force of will. She was Eliza Winters, fleeing through mountain passes with the medallion hidden beneath her clothes, hunters close behind as she sought sanctuary for herself and the unborn child who would continue the bloodline of seers. She was Margaret Thornton, facing the fury of a community that had discovered her abilities, accused of witchcraft, saved only by the timely intervention of the alpha of that generation, who spirited her away to safety in the dark of night. She was Sophia Winters, performing the final ritual of her life, pouring her essence into the medallion while whispering a prophecy about the one who would eventually claim it, a child not yet born who would face the greatest challenge in the long history of seers. Dozens of lives, dozens of women, each unique yet bound by common purpose, common power. Their knowledge flooded into Eleanor's consciousness, rituals of protection, methods of scrying beyond the veil, techniques for channeling energy through the medallion, ways to communicate with the natural world and the spirits that inhabited it. With the knowledge came emotions, love, fear, triumph, despair, experienced with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm her individual identity. Eleanor felt herself beginning to fragment, her sense of self diluting amidst the powerful personalities whose memories she now shared. Eleanor. Ezra's voice penetrated the chaos, a lifeline to her own time, her own identity. She felt his hands on her shoulders, warm and solid, anchoring her to the physical world, even as her mind traveled through centuries of shared experience. "Remember who you are," he said firmly. "You are Eleanor Frost. You are here, now. These memories are yours to access, not to consume you." She clung to his voice, using it to orient herself within the swirling vortex of foreign memories. Yes, she was Eleanor Frost, orphaned daughter of booksellers, assistant to Dr. Sullivan, woman of the present, not the past. Yet even as she reasserted her primary identity, she felt the others settle within her mind like layers of sediment, available but no longer threatening to overwhelm her consciousness. The knowledge they carried remained accessible, a vast library she could now navigate without becoming lost within it. A new sensation emerged, a connection to Ezra that transcended physical touch. Through his hands on her shoulders, she felt not just his presence, but aspects of his essence, his determination, his concern for her, and deeper currents of emotion he kept carefully controlled. Most surprising was the sense of his dual nature, the man and wolf coexisting within one being, the constant balance he maintained between human reason and animal instinct. Without conscious intention, Eleanor found herself following that connection deeper, accessing memories that were not from previous seers, but from Ezra himself. A boy of 8 discovering his mother's body in the castle garden. A teenager undergoing his first painful transformation beneath a full moon, his father guiding him through the process. A young man accepting the burden of leadership after his father's death, swearing vengeance against those responsible while assuming the mantle of Alpha with all its responsibilities. And running through these memories like a golden thread, dreams and glimpses of a woman with honey-blonde hair and unusual eyes, someone he had never met, but somehow knew awaited him in his future. Her, Eleanor. The connection flows both ways. Victor's voice penetrated her trance state. Be careful, Lord Blackwood. Your memories are becoming accessible to her as well. Eleanor sensed Ezra's momentary alarm, followed by deliberate acceptance. He did not withdraw his touch or attempt to shield his mind. Instead, he seemed to open himself more fully to the nascent bond between them, allowing her access to his experiences while stabilizing her consciousness as she integrated the flood of knowledge from the medallion. A final memory surfaced, not from a past seeress, nor from Ezra, but from the medallion itself. A vision of the first ritual performed by Freya and Fenrir, the creation of the barrier that had protected the world from soulbinders for centuries. Eleanor saw with perfect clarity the precise movements, the exact words, the specific channeling of energy required to strengthen that ancient protection. With that knowledge came understanding of what she and Ezra would need to do, not just a renewal of the barrier, but a complete reconstruction. The original pact had weakened over generations, compromised by periods without a seeress, by bloodlines that had diverged and reconnected. It would require more than the traditional ritual to repair the damage and counter the influence the soulbinders had already established in their world. The vision began to fade, the foreign memories settling into organized patterns within Eleanor's mind rather than the overwhelming flood they had initially presented. The cave around her came back into focus, the flickering lamps, the stone basin, Victor watching her with intense concentration, and Ezra still kneeling behind her, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Eleanor?" Ezra's voice held a note of concern. "Are you still with us?" She blinked, reorienting herself to the present moment. The medallion in her hand had cooled, though it maintained a subtle warmth that felt almost alive against her skin. Carefully, she slipped the chain back around her neck, the familiar weight now carrying new significance. "I'm here," she said, her voice hoarse as though she had been screaming, though she had made no sound throughout the ritual. "I remember everything." "Everything?" Victor leaned forward, his eyes wide. "All the previous seers?" "Not every detail of their lives," Eleanor clarified, finding it difficult to articulate the complex integration of knowledge she had experienced. "But their essential memories, their knowledge of the rituals, their understanding of the barrier and the threats against it, and—" She hesitated, glancing back at Ezra. "I saw the true nature of the bond between Seeress and Alpha, what it means, what it requires." A charged silence filled the cave. Victor looked between them, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "The ritual must be performed tomorrow night," Eleanor continued, certainty filling her voice. "Not just the traditional bonding, but a complete reconstruction of the barrier. The original pact has been compromised beyond simple renewal." "That would require tremendous power," Victor said cautiously, "more than a newly awakened seeress might safely channel." "I'm not merely newly awakened," Eleanor corrected. "The vision quest succeeded beyond what you anticipated. I have full access to the collective knowledge and power of all previous seers. I know exactly what must be done." She rose to her feet, surprised to find her legs steady despite the intensity of what she had just experienced. Ezra stood with her, his hands falling reluctantly from her shoulders. The loss of physical contact felt like a tangible absence, the connection between them having grown so strong during the ritual that its interruption left a hollow sensation in her chest. "We should return to the settlement," Victor suggested, gathering the materials he had used for the ritual. "You need rest and nourishment to integrate the awakening fully." As they emerged from the cave into the night air, Eleanor was struck by how differently she perceived the world around her. The stars overhead seemed brighter, more immediate, as though the barrier between earth and sky had thinned. The trees of the sacred grove pulsed with subtle energy she could now perceive, life force flowing through root and branch in rhythmic patterns. Even the stone buildings of the sanctuary revealed their history to her enhanced senses, layers of energy accumulated over centuries of rituals and habitation. "You're seeing differently now," Ezra observed, noticing her wonder as she gazed around the sanctuary. "Everything has depth," Eleanor tried to explain. "Layers I couldn't perceive before." "The sight," Victor nodded approvingly. the ability to perceive beyond the physical world. It will grow stronger as you adjust to the awakening." They walked in silence toward the main settlement area, where lights glowed warmly from windows and the scent of cooking fires perfumed the night air. As they approached, Eleanor noticed increased activity, men and women moving with purpose, checking weapons, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The atmosphere of preparation had intensified during the hours she had spent in ritual. One of Ezra's lieutenants, a tall man with a jagged scar across one cheek, approached them with quick strides. "Lord Blackwood, we've received word from our scouts. Sebastian's forces have established a camp at the base of the mountain. At least 30 shifters, including alphas from 3 neighboring territories." Ezra's expression hardened. "Any sign they've discovered the hidden approaches to the sanctuary?" "Not yet," the lieutenant replied, "but they're systematically exploring the lower slopes. It's only a matter of time before they find one of the passes." "Double the patrols," Ezra ordered, "and send word to our allies in the eastern valleys. If Sebastian has called in support from other territories, we must do the same." As the lieutenant departed to carry out these instructions, Victor turned to Ezra with concern etched on his features. "They're moving more quickly than we anticipated. If they discover the southern passage, they could reach the outer boundary by tomorrow afternoon." "Just in time to disrupt the ritual," Eleanor concluded grimly. "They may not know exactly what we intend," Ezra said, "but Sebastian is cunning. He'll have guessed we're planning some countermeasure against the Shadow Council's influence." Eleanor considered this, drawing on the newly accessible knowledge from previous seers. "The ritual requires the stone circle," she said, thinking aloud. "It's the focal point of power for the sanctuary, built directly above a convergence of ley lines. We can't perform it elsewhere. And the circle cannot be fully protected while maintaining the broader boundaries of the sanctuary," Victor added. "The concentration of power required for the ritual will inevitably weaken our defenses elsewhere." "So we need a diversion," Ezra concluded. "Something to draw Sebastian's attention away from the sanctuary during the critical hours of the ritual." A thoughtful silence fell between them as they considered options. Eleanor found herself accessing the tactical memories of previous seers, particularly those who had faced similar threats from opposing factions. "What about Dr. Sullivan?" she suggested suddenly. "Could she create a distraction in Ravenhollow itself, something that would force the Shadow Council to divide their attention?" Ezra's eyes lit with interest. "Sullivan has maintained her cover for decades. She has connections throughout the town, influence with the human population, and access to the library's secret archives," Victor added, nodding slowly, "including texts on protective rituals that could be performed without a fully awakened seeress, not as powerful as what you and Ezra will attempt, but perhaps enough to create a temporary disruption in the Soulbinder's influence over their human allies." "We would need to get a message to her," Ezra said. "The usual channels of communication might be monitored by Sebastian's people." "I can help with that," came a new voice from behind them. They turned to find a young man approaching through the darkness, his movements silent despite the rocky terrain. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with features that bore a striking resemblance to Ezra's, the same dark hair and strong jaw, though his eyes were a warmer brown rather than piercing blue. "Logan," Ezra acknowledged, surprise evident in his tone. "When did you return?" "About an hour ago," the younger man replied. "I came through the Western Passage. Sebastian's forces haven't discovered it yet." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, curiosity, and something like recognition in his expression. "So this is her, the new seeress." "Eleanor Frost," Ezra confirmed. "Eleanor, this is Logan Blackwood, my younger brother." Eleanor studied the newcomer with interest. The family resemblance was obvious, but Logan carried himself differently. Less rigid formality than Ezra, more coiled energy, like a predator perpetually ready to spring. "The prodigal returns," Victor remarked dryly. "I assume there's a reason for this timely appearance." Logan's expression sobered. "I've been monitoring the Shadow Council's movements for months. When I heard about what happened at the Winter Festival, I knew it was time to choose sides definitively." He looked at Ezra. "I'm sorry about the past, brother. I was wrong." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Ezra's face: wariness, hope, lingering hurt. You sided with Sebastian after Father's death. You believed his lies. I was young and angry, Logan acknowledged, and Sebastian can be very persuasive when he wants to be, but I've seen what he's really planning, what he's willing to sacrifice to achieve his goals. I want no part of it. Eleanor sensed the tension between the brothers, years of estrangement and betrayal creating a gulf that would not be easily bridged. Yet she also perceived something else, the bond of blood and shared history that remained despite everything that had come between them. "How do I know this isn't another deception?" Ezra asked bluntly. "Sebastian has used you against me before." Logan held his brother's gaze steadily. "Test me however you wish. Read my scent, my heartbeat. Or ask the seeress. Isn't that part of her gift? The ability to perceive truth and falsehood?" All eyes turned to Eleanor. Drawing on her newly awakened abilities, she studied Logan more deeply, looking beyond physical appearance to the patterns of energy that revealed character and intention. What she saw surprised her: genuine remorse layered over determination, fear not for himself, but for others, and a core of loyalty that had been misplaced but not destroyed. "He's telling the truth," she said with certainty. "His intentions toward us are sincere." Relief flashed across Logan's features, quickly masked by a return to pragmatic focus. "I can get a message to Dr. Sullivan without detection. I've developed methods of moving through Ravenhollow unnoticed, even by other shifters." "It's too dangerous," Ezra objected. "If Sebastian's people capture you—" "They won't," Logan interrupted with confident assurance. "This is what I do, brother. While you've ruled from the castle, I've learned to survive in the shadows. Let me use those skills for the right cause for once." Victor looked between the brothers, then to Eleanor. "The seeress confirms his sincerity, and we need reliable communication with our allies in town. I believe we should accept his offer." Ezra hesitated, clearly torn between tactical necessity and concern for his estranged brother. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but you'll take 2 of our best scouts with you, at least for the journey to the town borders." "Fair enough," Logan agreed. He turned to Eleanor with unexpected deference. "What message should I deliver to Dr. Sullivan, Lady Seeress?" Eleanor considered carefully, drawing on the tactical knowledge now available to her. "Tell her we need a 3-fold distraction. First, something to occupy the human allies of the Shadow Council, perhaps a town meeting or festival preparation that would require their presence and attention. Second, a ritual performed in the library itself, using the texts in the secret archives to temporarily disrupt the Soulbinder's influence. And third," she paused, "a memory from one of the previous seers surfacing with perfect clarity. Tell her to uncover the Ravenclaw mirror in the North Tower. Its activation will serve as a beacon to draw the attention of any Soulbinders currently manifesting in our world." Victor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The Ravenclaw mirror has been sealed away for generations. Its use carries significant risk." "All of this carries risk," Eleanor countered. "But the mirror will create precisely the kind of disturbance that will force Sebastian to divide his forces between the town and the sanctuary." Logan nodded, committing the instructions to memory. "I'll leave within the hour. With luck, I'll reach Dr. Sullivan before dawn." As Logan departed to prepare for his journey, Ezra turned to Eleanor with a mixture of concern and admiration. "The Ravenclaw mirror is a powerful artifact. Few seers have dared to use it, even in times of crisis." "Desperate circumstances require decisive measures," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the authoritative tone that came naturally to her now. "The knowledge of how to use it safely is among the memories I've accessed. Dr. Sullivan will need precise instructions, which I'll provide in a sealed message." Victor nodded approvingly. "Your awakening has indeed been thorough. You speak with the wisdom of a seeress who has held the position for decades, not hours." Eleanor felt the weight of that observation, the responsibility that came with the power and knowledge she had gained. "I'm still myself," she assured them both. Eleanor Frost, "but with access to the collective experience of those who came before me." "You should rest now," Ezra said gently. "Tomorrow will require all your strength." As they walked toward the dwelling that had been assigned to her, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her mind continued to process and integrate the vast repository of knowledge she had accessed during the vision quest, while her body reminded her that she remained human despite the extraordinary expansion of her consciousness. At the door to her quarters, she paused, turning to face Ezra. In the moonlight, his features seemed carved from stone, yet his eyes revealed the complex emotions he typically kept carefully controlled. "What I experienced during the ritual," she said quietly, "the connection between us. I saw your memories, your thoughts." "I know," he replied, his voice equally low. "I felt your presence within my mind. And tomorrow night, during the bonding ritual, that connection will become permanent." Ezra nodded solemnly. "If you still wish to proceed, despite everything you now know about what it entails." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully, seeing him with both her physical eyes and her newly awakened sight. The dual nature of his being, man and wolf, civilized leader and primal protector, fascinated rather than frightened her. And beneath the formal exterior, she perceived depths of loyalty, honor, and carefully restrained passion that resonated with something fundamental in her own nature. "I'm more certain than ever," she told him with quiet conviction. "The ritual is necessary to protect Ravenhollow and strengthen the barrier. But beyond necessity—" She hesitated, then continued with honest directness. "There's a rightness to this bond between us, as though the connection existed before we ever met, waiting only to be acknowledged." Something flared in Ezra's eyes, hope mingled with an intensity that made Eleanor's heart beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might close the distance between them, might give physical expression to the connection they both clearly felt. Instead, he inclined his head in a gesture of respect that somehow conveyed more than any impulsive action could have done. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, his voice carrying undertones that spoke of promises yet to be fulfilled. "Rest well, Eleanor." As he turned to leave, Eleanor felt the weight of anticipation settle over her, not just for the critical ritual they would perform the following night, but for the profound, permanent joining of their lives and destinies it would initiate. In less than 2 days, her existence had transformed beyond recognition, yet she felt no regret, no desire to return to the simpler life she had known before. For the first time, she was becoming who she was truly meant to be, and whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them not alone, but bound to a partner chosen by forces far older than either of them. Dawn broke over the sanctuary, with a sky streaked in crimson and gold. Eleanor stood at the entrance of her dwelling, watching as the first light touched the ancient standing stones in the sacred circle. The stones seemed to absorb the sunlight, glowing faintly with power that was now visible to her awakened sight. After a night of deep, restorative sleep filled with dreams that sorted and catalogued her newly acquired memories, Eleanor felt both refreshed and transformed. The knowledge of previous seers had settled within her mind, like books arranged on shelves, accessible yet no longer overwhelming her own identity. She dressed in clothing laid out for her, garments unlike any she had worn before. A gown of undyed linen fell to her ankles, embroidered with silver thread that formed protective symbols along the hem and sleeves. Over this, she donned a sleeveless robe of deep blue, the color traditionally associated with seers throughout the centuries. The raven medallion hung prominently at her throat, seeming to pulse with energy that resonated with her quickened heartbeat. Victor Sullivan approached as she finished dressing, his weathered face grave in the morning light. "Logan returned an hour ago," he informed her without preamble. "Dr. Sullivan received your message and has begun preparations in Ravenhollow. The distraction will commence at sunset, just before the ritual." "And Sebastian's forces?" Eleanor asked, adjusting the silver circlet that now confined her loose golden hair. "They've established a perimeter around the mountain's base, 3 camps positioned to monitor the known approaches to the sanctuary." Victor's expression darkened. 2 more Alpha bloodlines joined them during the night. Sebastian has assembled the largest coalition of shifters seen in generations. Eleanor absorbed this news with outward calm, though concern twisted in her stomach. What of our own allies? Ravens were dispatched to the Eastern Territories. The Morgan and Blackthorn packs have pledged support, but they're scattered and will need time to gather. Victor hesitated. They may not arrive before nightfall. Then we proceed with those we have, Eleanor said decisively. The ritual cannot wait for reinforcements. Each day the barrier weakens further. She paused, considering the other critical element of their plan. Any word from Dr. Sullivan about Catherine Harrington? Victor nodded grimly. Catherine has been rallying influential families in Ravenhollow against Ezra. She's spreading rumors about your disappearance, suggesting foul play. Dr. Sullivan believes Catherine is planning to formally challenge Ezra's right to govern when the town council meets tomorrow. She doesn't know that we're aware of her role in the Shadow Council, Eleanor mused. That might give us an advantage. Catherine is formidable in her own right, Victor cautioned. Less physically powerful than her brother Sebastian, but perhaps more dangerous in the realm of politics and manipulation. She's positioned herself as a voice of reason among the human population, while secretly serving as Sebastian's most effective agent in town. Eleanor nodded, remembering the calculated cruelty Catherine had displayed at the festival. The Ravenclaw mirror will affect her as much as any other Shadow Council member with Soulbinder connections. We'll need to be ready for her reaction when her supernatural guidance is suddenly disrupted. They walked together toward the central gathering area where sanctuary residents were busily preparing for the coming confrontation. Some checked weapons, silver-tipped arrows and spears effective against shifters. Others packed healing herbs and bandages, while still others reinforced the sanctuary's outer defenses with both physical barriers and mystical wards. Eleanor could now perceive glowing faintly around the perimeter. Ezra stood at the center of this activity, conferring with a group of his most trusted lieutenants. He looked up as Eleanor approached, their eyes meeting across the distance. Something passed between them, a wordless acknowledgement of the day's significance and the trials that lay ahead. "The seeress joins us," Ezra announced, the formal address a concession to the public setting rather than the more personal connection they had established. The gathered shifters bowed respectfully as Eleanor approached. "I've been explaining our defensive strategy," Ezra continued, indicating a rough map spread on a table before them. "Sebastian knows the ritual must be performed in the stone circle. He will concentrate his attack there if he breaches our outer defenses." Eleanor studied the map, which showed the sanctuary and surrounding mountain terrain. Markers indicated the positions of Sebastian's forces and the defensive posts Ezra had established. "We should assume Sebastian has informants within Ravenhollow itself," she said, drawing on tactical memories from previous seers. "Once Dr. Sullivan activates the Ravenclaw mirror, he'll be forced to divide his attention between the town and the sanctuary." "That might thin his forces here," one of the lieutenants suggested hopefully. "Or make him more desperate to disrupt our ritual before we can complete it," Logan countered. He stood slightly apart from the others, his recent return and complicated history creating a subtle barrier between himself and the pack hierarchy. "Sebastian knows that if you succeed in strengthening the barrier, his connection to the Soulbinders will be severely weakened, which is precisely what makes him dangerous," Ezra agreed grimly. "A cornered predator fights with particular ferocity." Victor cleared his throat. "There is another matter we must consider, the ritual itself." All eyes turned to the elderly keeper, who continued with solemn authority. "The bonding between Sirius and Alpha has always generated tremendous power, but what Eleanor proposes, a complete reconstruction of the original barrier rather than a simple reinforcement, will create energies not seen since Freya and Fenrir's time." "What does that mean for those defending the sanctuary?" Ezra asked. "The ritual will generate a surge of power that may temporarily disrupt the sanctuary's existing protections," Victor explained. "For a brief period, perhaps only minutes, our defenses will be vulnerable before the new barrier establishes itself." "Sebastian will sense that moment of weakness," Logan predicted. "He'll coordinate his attack to coincide with it. Then we must ensure he doesn't reach the stone circle," Ezra declared, his voice hard with determination. "I'll position our strongest fighters in concentric rings around the ritual site. If the outer defenses fail, they'll fall back in sequence, buying time for the ritual to complete." Eleanor listened to these preparations, a plan forming in her mind based on knowledge accessed from the collective memories of previous seers. "There's another element we should consider," she said, her voice carrying unexpected authority that drew everyone's attention. "The soulbinders themselves." "They cannot fully manifest in our world," Victor reminded her. "Not without the barrier being completely broken." "Not fully, no," Eleanor agreed. "But they can project influence, particularly through those who've willingly opened themselves to contact. Sebastian and Catherine will be directly linked to soulbinder entities. Those connections give them power, but also create vulnerability." "What kind of vulnerability?" Ezra asked, his expression intent. "During the ritual, as we reconstruct the barrier, I can specifically target those connections, sever them, rather than simply blocking future contact." Eleanor's certainty came from Freya's original memories, knowledge no subsequent seeress had needed to access in generations. "It won't defeat Sebastian or Catherine physically, but it will deprive them of their supernatural advantage." A thoughtful silence followed this revelation. Victor stroked his beard, clearly intrigued by the possibility. "Such a tactic has not been attempted since the earliest days of the seeress tradition. It would require precise control during an already demanding ritual." "I can do it," Eleanor stated without arrogance, simply acknowledging the capabilities she now possessed. "But I'll need something personal from both Sebastian and Catherine, objects they've handled, a drop of blood, even a lock of hair. Something carrying their essence that I can use to target the connection specifically." Logan straightened suddenly. "I have this for Sebastian," he said, reaching into a pocket and withdrawing a small metal disc, a coin or medallion of some kind. "He gave it to me years ago, as a token of our alliance. He carried it for years before that." Eleanor accepted the object, feeling an immediate sense of wrongness emanating from it, a dark energy that made her skin crawl. Her enhanced perception revealed traces of Sebastian's essence, but also something else, a shadowy presence that clung to the metal like a film of oil on water. "This will serve perfectly," she said, slipping the coin into a small pouch at her waist. "It carries not just Sebastian's energy, but traces of his soulbinder connection as well. But what about Catherine?" "I believe I can help with that," Victor interjected. He withdrew a delicate silver hairpin from an inner pocket of his robes. "This belonged to Catherine, Dr. Sullivan managed to acquire it during one of the town council meetings last month, suspecting we might need it." Eleanor examined the hairpin carefully, with both physical and mystical senses. Like Sebastian's coin, it carried traces of Catherine's essence, her touch, her energy, but also the unmistakable taint of soulbinder influence, though the connection appeared different from Sebastian's, more subtle and insidiously woven throughout her being. "Their connections are different," she observed, placing the hairpin in her pouch alongside the coin. "Sebastian's is raw and direct, a channel of pure power. Catherine's is more intricate, more deeply embedded in her consciousness. She may not even be fully aware of how much she's been influenced." "Does that change your approach?" Ezra asked. "It means severing her connection may have more profound effects on her mind," Eleanor explained. "Sebastian might experience the loss as a sudden absence of power, but Catherine could face a more fundamental crisis of identity and purpose." The planning continued through the morning and into the afternoon, preparations accelerating as the day progressed. Eleanor divided her time between conferences with Victor about the specifics of the ritual and quiet meditation in her quarters, focusing her mind for the tremendous challenge ahead. Meanwhile, in Ravenhollow, events were unfolding according to Dr. Sullivan's careful orchestration. Through her awakened sight, Eleanor could periodically glimpse fragments of the situation in town, images that flashed through her consciousness like windows briefly opening onto distant scenes. She saw Dr. Sullivan in the castle library, meticulously arranging ancient texts on a circular table, each book positioned precisely according to diagrams only a true keeper of knowledge would understand. The elderly librarian moved with purpose, her typically mild demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of a woman enacting a plan decades in the making. She glimpsed Catherine Harrington addressing a gathering of town elders in the great hall of a merchant's mansion, her elegant crimson gown and perfectly arranged dark hair presenting an image of aristocratic authority. Catherine's voice carried the practiced cadence of a skilled manipulator as she described the troubling disappearance of Eleanor Frost and the increasingly erratic behavior of Lord Blackwood. The gathered listeners nodded solemnly, already half convinced by her persuasive rhetoric. Most significantly, Eleanor perceived the Ravenclaw mirror being uncovered in the north tower of the castle, a massive silver-backed glass in an ornate frame carved with ravens in flight. Even through her distant sight, she could sense the tremendous power contained within the artifact, dormant for generations, but ready to awaken at the proper command. These glimpses reassured Eleanor that the Ravenhollow portion of their plan was proceeding as intended, though they also reinforced the urgency of their timeline. Catherine was moving quickly to consolidate support within the town, preparing for some decisive action that would coincide with Sebastian's assault on the sanctuary. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Eleanor stood at the window of her dwelling, watching the lengthening shadows with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Despite the confidence she projected for the benefit of others, she harbored private doubts about her ability to channel the immense power the ritual would require. Previous seers had trained for years before attempting even standard bonding ceremonies. She had had mere days to absorb and integrate centuries of accumulated knowledge. A soft knock at her door interrupted these reflections. "Enter," she called, turning from the window. Ezra stepped into the room, no longer dressed in the practical clothing of the day's preparations, but in ritual attire similar to her own, a tunic of deep blue beneath a sleeveless robe embroidered with silver symbols that complemented those on Eleanor's gown. Around his neck hung a pendant that mirrored her raven medallion, though his bore the symbol of a wolf rather than a bird. "The scouts report movement in Sebastian's camps," he said without preamble. "They're preparing to advance up the mountain paths." Eleanor nodded, having expected this news. "And in Ravenhollow?" "Logan received a message from Dr. Sullivan an hour ago. The Ravenclaw mirror has been positioned in the north tower. She awaits the signal to activate it." "Good. The timing must be precise. The mirror's power will create maximum disruption at the moment we begin the bonding ritual." Eleanor studied Ezra's face, noting the tension evident in the set of his jaw and the intensity of his gaze. "You're concerned." It wasn't a question, but he answered nonetheless. "About many things. The safety of the sanctuary, the lives of those who will fight to protect us during the ritual itself, and what it will demand of you." He paused, his voice dropping slightly. "And what comes after, should we succeed." Eleanor understood his meaning immediately. The bonding ritual would unite them permanently in ways that transcended ordinary human connection. They would share aspects of their consciousness, their very essence becoming intertwined through the ancient magic they would perform. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently. "Not about the necessity," Ezra replied, "but about the fairness to you. You've had so little time to adjust to your heritage, to the responsibilities of a seeress, and now to be bound forever to a man you barely know." "A man I've dreamed of all my life," Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with the candor of her admission. "Before I knew what the dreams meant, before I understood who I was, my soul recognized yours across time and space." She stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the supernatural warmth that always emanated from his skin. "This isn't about fairness or choice in the ordinary sense. It's about recognizing a pattern woven into the fabric of our existence long before either of us was born." Something shifted in Ezra's expression, the careful restraint he typically maintained giving way to raw emotion that transformed his features. His hand rose, hesitating briefly before coming to rest against her cheek, the touch both gentle and electric. "When I first saw you in the library," he said, voice low and intimate, "something inside me quieted, a restlessness I'd carried since childhood without realizing it, as though a missing piece had finally been found." Eleanor leaned slightly into his touch, the connection between them humming like a plucked string. The medallion recognized me. The sanctuary welcomed me. But it was your recognition that truly awakened me to who I am. For a breathless moment, they stood suspended in perfect understanding. The bond that would soon be formalized already forming between them through sheer proximity and shared purpose. Then, reluctantly, Ezra withdrew his hand. "Victor awaits us in the sacred grove," he said. "There are final preparations for the ritual." Eleanor nodded, gathering her composure. Personal feelings, however powerful, would need to be set aside for the greater task ahead. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. The sacred grove stood empty when they arrived, the ancient oak trees shifting gently in the evening breeze. Victor had been called away to address some urgent matter at the perimeter, leaving instructions for them to begin the preliminary meditation that would focus their energies for the ritual. They settled beneath the largest oak, sitting cross-legged on the soft earth, facing each other with knees almost touching. Eleanor closed her eyes, centering her consciousness as Victor had taught her. She could feel Ezra's presence opposite her, his energy distinctive and powerful. "Open your mind to me," she instructed softly, drawing on the ritual knowledge of previous seers. "Let me see the wolf within you." Ezra's breathing deepened, his own meditation allowing the carefully maintained barriers between his human and animal natures to thin slightly. Through her enhanced perception, Eleanor could now see the dual essence of his being, the man and wolf coexisting in one physical form, constantly balanced through sheer force of will. The wolf aspect appeared to her inner sight as a silvery shadow that overlay Ezra's human form, powerful and wild, yet not separate from his humanity. Rather, the two natures were interwoven, complementary rather than opposing forces. "Beautiful," she murmured, genuinely awed by the complexity of his dual being. "You maintain such perfect balance." "With increasing difficulty," Ezra admitted, his voice strained. "Since my father's death, the wolf has grown stronger, harder to contain. Without a seeress to balance me—" "Show me," Eleanor encouraged. "Let me see how the imbalance manifests." Ezra hesitated briefly, then relaxed his control further. The wolf aspect of his nature surged forward, the silvery shadow growing more substantial in Eleanor's perception. She could sense the primal power of it, ancient instincts of hunt and territory, pack loyalty and fierce protection. But she also perceived distortion in the balance, areas where the wolf energy had begun to dominate, threatening to overwhelm the human consciousness that directed it. Without thinking, Eleanor reached out with both hands, placing her palms against Ezra's cheeks. The contact sent a jolt of energy through both of them, a current that connected their essences more directly than mere proximity could achieve. Through this connection, Eleanor channeled a subtle stream of her own energy, not to suppress the wolf nature, but to harmonize it with Ezra's humanity. She worked instinctively, guided by the collective knowledge of generations of seers who had performed similar balancing for their alpha partners. Ezra gasped at the sensation, his eyes flying open to reveal irises that shifted between human blue and lupine gold. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Preliminary balancing," Eleanor explained, continuing the delicate work, a foretaste of what the ritual will establish permanently. Under her influence, the distortions in Ezra's dual nature began to smooth, wolf and human aspects settling into more harmonious relationship. The strain in his features eased, replaced by an expression of wonder and profound relief. "I've been fighting it for so long," he said, voice rough with emotion, "containing the wolf through sheer will, never finding true balance." "That's the core purpose of the bond between Seeress and Alpha," Eleanor told him gently. "Not domination of one nature over another, but harmony between them. The Seeress doesn't weaken the wolf, she helps integrate it fully with the man." Their meditation was interrupted by Victor's hurried return to the grove, his expression grave. "Sebastian's forces have begun their ascent," he reported, multiple groups approaching from different directions. "And there's worse news. Sensors at the outer boundary detected soulbinder activity increasing dramatically in the past hour." "They sense what we're planning," Eleanor concluded, rising fluidly to her feet. They'll be pushing Sebastian to attack before we can complete the ritual. Our defenders are in position, Victor assured them. Logan leads the outer perimeter guard, with instructions to fall back in sequence if overwhelmed. The inner circle around the standing stones is our most heavily defended position. And the signal to Dr. Sullivan? Ezra asked, also standing. Dispatched. The Ravenclaw mirror will activate as we begin the ritual, creating the diversion in Ravenhollow that should divide Sebastian's attention. Victor turned to Eleanor. Are you prepared, Seeress? Once begun, the ritual cannot be interrupted without grave consequences. Eleanor touched the raven medallion at her throat, feeling its responsive warmth against her fingers. I am ready, she confirmed with quiet certainty. We should proceed directly to the stone circle. Twilight approaches, the optimal time to begin. The three of them moved through the sanctuary toward the standing stones, sanctuary residents bowing respectfully as they passed. Eleanor could sense the mixture of hope and fear that permeated the community, ancient prophecies coming to fulfillment in their lifetime, but at a moment of unprecedented danger. The stone circle stood silent and expectant in the fading light, megalithic sentinels that had witnessed centuries of rituals since Freya first established the sanctuary. At the center of the circle rested the altar stone, a flat, slightly concave slab of granite worn smooth by generations of use. Victor guided them through the final preparations, placing specific herbs and crystals at cardinal points around the altar stone, lighting candles whose flames burned with unusual steadiness in the evening air, and reciting preliminary invocations in the ancient language of the first seers. As these preparations concluded, the first sounds of conflict reached them from the outer perimeter, distant shouts and the distinctive howls of shifters in wolf form. Sebastian's forces had reached the sanctuary's boundaries. It begins, Ezra said grimly, glancing toward the source of the sounds. Sooner than we anticipated. Then we must begin as well, Eleanor replied, taking her position beside the altar stone. Victor, you should join the inner defense ring now. What follows must be performed by Ezra and me alone. The old man nodded, clasping both their hands briefly in a gesture of blessing. May the wisdom of all previous seers guide you, he said solemnly, and may the strength of the true Alpha bloodline protect you both. With that, he departed swiftly, moving to coordinate the sanctuary's final defensive preparations. Alone within the stone circle, Eleanor and Ezra faced each other across the altar. The twilight deepened around them, stars beginning to appear in the eastern sky, while the west still glowed with the last light of day, the perfect balance point between light and darkness that traditionally marked the beginning of the most powerful rituals. In ancient times, Eleanor said, her voice taking on the cadence of formal ritual, when the world was young and the barriers between realms were thin, Freya Ravenclaw and Fenrir Blackwood forged a pact. Human and wolf, wisdom and strength, sight and protection, joined in common purpose against forces that would consume both their kinds. That pact has endured through generations, Ezra continued, the ritual words coming to him through the ancestral memory all Alphas carried, renewed by each pairing of Seeress and Alpha, maintaining the barrier that protects our world from that which lies beyond. Eleanor removed the raven medallion from around her neck, placing it carefully on the altar stone. Ezra did the same with his wolf pendant, positioning it so the two symbols faced each other across the smooth granite surface. Tonight, we renew not just the bond between Seeress and Alpha, Eleanor declared, but the fundamental barrier itself, weakened by time and assault, threatened by those who would break it for their own gain. From a small pouch at her waist, she withdrew a silver dagger, its blade etched with symbols that matched those on her ritual robes. With deliberate movements, she drew the sharp edge across her left palm, allowing several drops of blood to fall upon the raven medallion. Blood of the seer, carrier of visions, she intoned, witness to what lies beyond the veil. Ezra took the dagger from her, repeating the action with his own palm. His blood fell upon the wolf pendant, darkening the silver. Blood of the Alpha, carrier of strength, he responded, guardian of the boundary between worlds. Together they placed their wounded palms against each other, fingers intertwining as their blood mingled. The contact sent a shock of energy through them both, far stronger than the connection they had established during meditation. Eleanor gasped as her consciousness expanded dramatically, simultaneously perceiving multiple layers of reality that had previously been invisible to her. She could see the barrier itself now, not a solid wall, but a complex lattice of energy that surrounded their world like a permeable membrane, allowing the natural flow of certain energies while blocking others. And she could see the damage to that barrier. Places where it had grown thin and fragile, where dark entities pressed against it, seeking entry. Most disturbingly, she could perceive tendrils of darkness that had already penetrated, connections running from the other side directly to certain individuals in their world. The strongest of these connections led to Sebastian Harrington, a black cord of malevolent energy that fed directly into his essence, corrupting and transforming it into something neither fully human nor shifter, but something else entirely. A similar connection, though more delicate and intricately woven, linked to Catherine Harrington in Ravenhollow, its subtle influence having shaped her thoughts and ambitions for years without her full awareness. Through her connected hand, Eleanor felt Ezra experiencing these perceptions with her, his consciousness expanding to encompass realities he had previously only sensed indirectly. His grip tightened as the full scope of the threat became clear to him. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate with the standing stones themselves, "we begin the reweaving." With their free hands, they each retrieved their medallions from the altar stone. The silver pieces had changed, glowing with inner light that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. When they touched the medallions together, the light flared brilliantly, forcing them to close their physical eyes while continuing to perceive through spiritual sight. Eleanor began the ancient words of power, phrases taught by Freya to each successive seeress, preserved through the medallion's memory. As she spoke, energy gathered within the stone circle, swirling around them in patterns visible only to enhanced perception. The standing stones hummed with resonant power, centuries of accumulated ritual energy awakening at her command. Ezra joined the incantation, his deeper voice complementing hers in perfect harmony. Through their joined hands, power flowed between them, amplifying and focusing. The wolf aspect of his nature surged forward, no longer constrained, but channeled purposefully, adding primal strength to Eleanor's visionary precision. Around the sanctuary, the effects of the ritual began to manifest physically. The air within the stone circle shimmered like heat waves rising from summer ground. The candles Victor had placed burned with unnaturally bright flames that shifted through all colors of the spectrum. The very earth seemed to vibrate beneath their feet, responding to the power they were channeling. At the perimeter of the sanctuary, the battle intensified. Sebastian's forces, sensing the ritual's commencement, pressed forward with increased urgency. Wolf howls and human shouts mingled with the clash of weapons and the distinctive sounds of shifters transforming between forms. Meanwhile, in Ravenhollow, the activation of the Ravenclaw mirror created immediate and dramatic effects. As Eleanor and Ezra began their ritual, Dr. Sullivan spoke the activation phrase before the ancient artifact in the North Tower. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water before emitting a pulse of silvery light that expanded outward in concentric rings, passing through walls and buildings to encompass the entire town. For ordinary residents, the effect was subtle. A momentary sense of disorientation, a brief headache, strange dreams that night. But for those connected to the Soulbinders, the impact was profound and immediate. In the great hall where Catherine Harrington had been addressing influential town elders, chaos erupted. The mirror's energy struck her mid-sentence, severing the subtle connection that had influenced her actions and thoughts for years. She staggered, clutching her head as conflicting memories and motivations suddenly competed for dominance in her mind. Her own genuine ambitions now distinct from the alien influence that had shaped them. "Lady Harrington, are you unwell?" one of the elders asked with concern, as Catherine gripped the edge of the table, her face suddenly ashen. Catherine's voice faltered as unfamiliar clarity washed through her consciousness. For the first time in years, she could distinguish between her own thoughts and the subtle whispers that had guided her actions. The realization that she had been manipulated, her justified grievances against the Blackwood family, twisted and amplified by an outside force, struck her with the force of physical blow. Similar scenes played out across Ravenhollow as the mirror's influence disrupted every soulbinder connection within the town. Those who had knowingly collaborated with the shadow entities found themselves suddenly cut off from their supernatural guidance. Those who had been unwitting puppets experienced jarring moments of clarity as the foreign influence receded from their minds. Dr. Sullivan watched from the tower window as confusion spread through the town below. Lights appeared in windows as residents awakened from sleep, drawn outside by an inexplicable sense that something fundamental had changed. In the town square, a group of Sebastian's human allies who had been preparing to secure the castle now argued among themselves, their unified purpose fracturing as individual doubts and questions emerged from beneath the soulbinder influence. "The first phase is complete," Dr. Sullivan murmured to herself, watching Catherine Harrington stumble from the merchant's mansion, her followers dispersing in confusion. "Now for the second." The librarian returned to the circular table in the castle library where ancient texts lay arranged in a precise pattern. With practiced movements, she began a secondary ritual, one designed not to sever connections, but to create temporary protective wards around key locations in Ravenhollow. The town hall, the castle, the central square, each received invisible shields that would prevent any coordinated action by Sebastian's remaining allies. Within the ritual, Eleanor and Ezra remained focused, their consciousness partly detached from physical reality as they worked directly with the energies of the barrier. Through their joined hands and the touching medallions, they channeled power upward and outward, directing it toward the weakened sections of the cosmic lattice. Where the barrier had thinned, they reinforced it with new energy, not just patching the damage, but restructuring the entire section according to the original patterns Freya had established. Where dark entities pressed against the boundary, they created additional layers of protection, complex geometric formations that repelled the specific energies of the soulbinders. As the ritual progressed, Eleanor became aware of the secondary effects taking place in Ravenhollow. Through her enhanced perception, she could sense confusion and disarray spreading among Sebastian's human allies, their supernatural guidance suddenly scrambled by the mirror's influence. "Now for Sebastian himself," she murmured, momentarily breaking from the formal incantation. With her free hand, she reached into the pouch at her waist, retrieving the coin Logan had provided, the token carrying traces of Sebastian's essence and his soulbinder connection. Placing it on the altar between the glowing medallions, Eleanor focused her attention on the dark cord she had perceived earlier, the direct link between Sebastian and whatever entity had corrupted him. Drawing on knowledge preserved from Freya's original confrontation with the soulbinders, Eleanor crafted a specific pattern of energy, a blade of pure light designed to sever supernatural connections without harming the physical being. Through the token, she directed this energy precisely at the cord binding Sebastian to his otherworldly master. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. A howl of rage echoed across the mountain, so loud and distinctively inhuman that it momentarily silenced the ongoing battle. Through her spiritual sight, Eleanor watched the dark cord connecting Sebastian to the soulbinder entity snap, the severed ends writhing like wounded serpents. "It's done," she gasped, the effort of such precise working taxing even her enhanced abilities. "Sebastian's connection is broken." Ezra's expression showed grim satisfaction, though he remained focused on the larger ritual still underway. "And Catherine?" Eleanor reached for the silver hairpin, placing it alongside Sebastian's coin. "Now for his sister," she said, focusing her attention on the more intricate connection she had perceived earlier. Unlike Sebastian's direct channel of power, Catherine's connection resembled a complex web woven through her psyche, subtle influences that had guided her thoughts and amplified certain aspects of her personality while suppressing others. Severing this connection required more delicate work, like untangling a knot rather than simply cutting a cord. Eleanor shaped the ritual energy with meticulous precision, carefully unwinding the soulbinder influence from Catherine's essence without damaging the woman's core identity. Through her enhanced perception, she could sense the immediate effects in Ravenhollow. Catherine staggering as genuine free will returned to her fully for the first time in years. Both connections are severed, Eleanor confirmed, returning her full attention to the primary ritual. Sebastian and Catherine are cut off from their soulbinder masters. In Ravenhollow, Catherine Harrington found herself alone in the castle gardens, having fled the confused gathering in the merchant's mansion. Her mind whirled with conflicting thoughts and memories, years of actions and decisions now cast in a new, disturbing light. She recalled her treatment of Eleanor at the Winter Festival, the calculated cruelty, the public humiliation, and recognized for the first time how those actions had been subtly encouraged by the whispers in her mind. Her legitimate resentment of the Blackwood family's control over Ravenhollow had been weaponized and twisted by an influence she had never fully recognized until now. "What have I done?" she whispered, gripping the garden wall as the full implications dawned on her. "What have I allowed myself to become?" The realization that she had been manipulated, used as a tool against her own community, struck Catherine with crushing force. Tears spilled down her cheeks as genuine remorse, long suppressed by the soulbinder influence, surged through her consciousness. Dr. Sullivan found her there moments later, having tracked Catherine's likely movements after the mirror's activation. "It wasn't entirely your fault," the librarian said quietly, approaching the trembling woman. "The soulbinders are ancient entities that have perfected the art of manipulation over millennia. They find existing emotions, pride, ambition, resentment, and gradually twist them to serve their purposes." Catherine looked up, recognition dawning in her tear-stained face. You've always known, haven't you? About them. About what was happening to me." "I've observed," Dr. Sullivan corrected gently. "As keeper of the records, it's my duty to watch for signs of soulbinder influence. I've seen it take hold in your family for generations. Your grandfather, your father, now you and Sebastian."
"Sebastian?"
Catherine breathed, horror washing over her features.
"He's attacking the sanctuary, isn't he?"
"Where Eleanor and Lord Blackwood?" "Yes, and he must be stopped." Dr. Sullivan's expression was grave. "The ritual they're performing will permanently close the pathways the soulbinders have been using to influence our world. But Sebastian could still disrupt it if he reaches them in time." "I can help," Catherine said suddenly, straightening with newfound clarity of purpose. "I know his strategies, his contingency plans, and there are people in town still loyal to me, people who would follow my lead rather than continue with Sebastian's agenda." Dr. Sullivan studied Catherine's face carefully, searching for any sign of deception or lingering soulbinder influence. Finding none, she nodded. "Then we must act quickly. The ritual has begun, but the most vulnerable moment is yet to come." Within the ritual, Eleanor and Ezra approached the most critical phase, the permanent establishment of their bond, which would anchor the reconstructed barrier for the next generation. This was the moment of greatest vulnerability, when the old protections would momentarily fail before the new ones fully activated. As if sensing this weakness, a renewed assault hit the sanctuary's outer perimeter. Through their connected consciousness, Eleanor and Ezra perceived sanctuary defenders falling back in organized retreat, buying time for the ritual to complete. Logan led one group of defenders, holding a narrow pass against superior numbers through sheer tactical brilliance and ferocity. "We must accelerate," Eleanor urged, increasing the tempo of the incantation. "The final binding now." Their joined hands tightened, blood still mingling where their palms pressed together. The medallions on the altar stone rose slightly into the air, suspended by the energies coursing through the circle. Light poured from the symbols, connecting them with a visible beam of radiance. "Blood to blood, sight to strength," they chanted in unison, the ancient words carrying power that transcended their literal meaning. Two natures joined in common purpose, two souls bound by ancient pact. The final words of the ritual hung in the air between them, pregnant with transformative potential. Once spoken, they could never be revoked. Their essences would be permanently linked across time and space, their very souls recognizing each other through lifetimes to come. "As it was in the beginning, so shall it be until the ending of the world," they spoke together, sealing the ritual. Two made one, the barrier secured, the world's imbalance maintained. Power surged through the stone circle, momentarily lifting them both physically from the ground. The standing stones blazed with light, visible even to normal sight, energy pouring upward in a column that pierced the night sky. Above them, the stars seemed to shift and realign, cosmic forces responding to the renewal of ancient patterns. Within their joined consciousness, Eleanor and Ezra experienced the completion of their bond, a merging that preserved individual identity while creating something greater than either alone. She felt his strength, his primal connection to the natural world, his fierce protectiveness flowing into her. He received her visionary perspective, her ability to perceive beyond ordinary reality, her intuitive understanding of patterns and energies. Most significantly, the wolf aspect of his nature found perfect balance, no longer requiring constant control, but integrated harmoniously with his humanity, each aspect enhancing rather than opposing the other. Through Eleanor's influence, Ezra achieved the equilibrium all shifters sought, but few ever truly found. As the ritual energies began to settle, their perception expanded outward once more to the reconstructed barrier between worlds. Where before they had seen a weakened, compromised lattice, now a robust, intricate structure surrounded their reality. Not impermeable, for some exchange between realms was natural and necessary, but selectively filtering, allowing beneficial energies while blocking malevolent ones. The soulbinders raged against this renewed boundary, their influence suddenly curtailed, their carefully cultivated connections to the human world severely restricted. Through the barrier, Eleanor and Ezra could sense their furious attempts to re-establish contact with Sebastian and his allies, attempts that now found no purchase in a protected reality. Gradually, they returned to full awareness of their physical surroundings. The medallions settled back onto the altar stone, though they continued to pulse with inner light. Their joined hands separated slowly, the wounds already healing through the accelerated regeneration their bond now shared. "It's done," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse from the ritual incantations. "The barrier is restored." Ezra nodded, his eyes still showing traces of golden wolf light amidst the human blue. "And our bond?" Eleanor smiled, feeling the new connection between them. A constant, comforting presence at the edge of her consciousness, like knowing a trusted companion stands just behind you, even without looking. Complete. Perfect. Their moment of accomplishment was interrupted by Victor rushing into the stone circle, his expression urgent despite the visible awe at the energies still dissipating around them. "Sebastian has broken through the inner defense line," he reported breathlessly. "He's coming himself, with a small force of his most loyal followers. Logan and the others are engaging them, but they're fighting their way toward the circle." "How?" Ezra demanded, instantly alert. Without his soulbinder connection, he should be significantly weakened. "Desperation," Eleanor surmised, her enhanced perception stretching outward to sense the approaching threat. "He felt his connection break and knows what it means. He's coming to destroy the source, to kill us before the new barrier fully solidifies." Ezra's expression hardened, the Alpha's protective instinct surging to the forefront. Through their bond, Eleanor felt his absolute determination to defend her, the pack, and the sanctuary, layers of commitment that defined his very being. "The ritual is complete but vulnerable until the new energies fully integrate," she explained, gathering her strength despite the exhaustion of the intense working they had just performed. "If Sebastian disrupts the stone circle now, it could destabilize everything we've accomplished." "Then we stop him," Ezra stated simply, "here and now." The sound of fighting grew closer. Shouts and snarls, the clash of weapons, the impact of bodies colliding in desperate combat. Through the trees surrounding the stone circle, Eleanor glimpsed flashes of movement, defenders and attackers engaged in lethal struggle. "You should withdraw to safety," Ezra told her, moving to position himself between Eleanor and the approaching danger. "The sanctuary has deeper chambers, protected spaces." "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "My place is here, with you. The bond gives me access to your strength, just as it gives you access to my perception. We face this together." Before Ezra could argue further, a massive form burst through the tree line. A russet wolf, larger than any natural animal, its fur matted with blood, its eyes blazing with hatred and desperation. Behind it came 3 more shifters in wolf form, coordinating their movements with practiced precision. Sebastian had arrived, intent on destroying what they had created. The russet wolf paused at the edge of the stone circle, hackles raised, lips pulled back to reveal gleaming fangs. With a shudder of transformation, it shifted into human form, the change happening with unnatural speed that indicated years of practice. Sebastian Harrington stood before them, naked and bloodied, but emanating dangerous power, despite the loss of his soulbinder connection. His red hair hung wild around a face contorted with rage, his eyes still holding traces of wolf gold. "You think you've won," he snarled, addressing both Eleanor and Ezra. "You think severing my connection changes anything." He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The old ways are finished. The barrier you've restored is a relic of a dying age." "The barrier protects all life in this world," Eleanor responded, stepping forward to stand beside Ezra rather than behind him. "Including shifters. The soulbinders used you, Sebastian. They never intended to share power, only to exploit your strength to gain entry to our world." "Lies," Sebastian spat. "The Cirrus tradition has always been about control, keeping shifters leashed, denying our true nature. We are predators, meant to rule, not to live in harmony with human weakness." "Is that why you murdered my mother?" Ezra asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because she represented this harmony you despise so much?" Sebastian's lips curved in a cruel smile. "She was a necessary sacrifice, as was your father later, as the Frost family was. All obstacles to the natural order, predator and prey, strength triumphant over weakness." Eleanor felt Ezra's rage through their bond, a cold, focused fury, unlike the hot anger most humans experienced. The alpha's protective instinct combined with personal grief to create a killing determination that would not be denied. "You won't leave this circle alive," Ezra stated, not as a threat but as a simple fact. "The last service you can offer your pack is surrender, sparing their lives after your misguided leadership." Sebastian laughed again. "My pack remains loyal, and while you two performed your pretty ritual, they were securing the sanctuary. As we speak, my lieutenants are eliminating the last pockets of resistance. You have nowhere to run." "We have no intention of running," Eleanor replied calmly, drawing strength from the bond with Ezra and the power of the newly reinforced barrier still humming through the stone circle. "This ends here, as it began centuries ago, between those who would protect the balance of worlds and those who would destroy it for personal gain." Sebastian's face twisted with hatred. "Then let's finish it properly." With frightening speed, he began to transform again, bones cracking, muscle reshaping as his body returned to wolf form. His 3 companions followed suit, the 4 massive wolves spreading out to surround the stone circle. "Eleanor," Ezra said quietly, already removing his ritual robe in preparation for his own transformation. "Use the standing stones. They'll amplify your abilities. I'll handle Sebastian." She nodded, understanding his strategy. Through their bond, she felt his wolf nature surging forward, not fighting against his humanity, but integrating with it, creating a perfect synthesis of rational thought and primal power. This was what the Cirrus Alpha bond was truly meant to achieve, not dominance of one nature over another, but perfect harmony between them. Ezra's transformation was unlike any shifting Eleanor had witnessed before. Where Sebastian's change had been violent, almost desperate, Ezra's was fluid and controlled, a natural flow between forms rather than a forced restructuring. In moments, the massive silver-gray wolf stood beside her, larger and more powerful than any of Sebastian's pack. Through their bond, his thoughts reached her clearly. "Be ready. When I engage Sebastian, the others will try to reach you. That's their true target. They know killing the Cirrus would destabilize everything we've accomplished." "I understand." she responded silently, moving to the center of the stone circle where the altar stone would provide additional focus for her abilities. Go! With blinding speed, Ezra launched himself at the russet wolf. Sebastian met the charge head-on, the two alphas colliding with impact that seemed to shake the very air. Teeth flashed, claws tore, bodies twisted in lethal combat as ancient enemies finally confronted each other directly. As Ezra had predicted, the moment he engaged Sebastian, the three subordinate wolves darted forward, attempting to circle around the fighting alphas toward Eleanor. But she was prepared, her hand closing around the raven medallion that still rested on the altar stone. Drawing on the power concentrated within the standing stones, Eleanor extended her perception outward, creating a barrier of energy that surrounded the stone circle. The approaching wolves hit this invisible wall at full speed, yelping in pain and confusion as it repelled them. Through the bond, Eleanor remained partly aware of Ezra's battle with Sebastian, a brutal contest of strength, speed, and tactical cunning. The two wolves circled and lunged, each seeking advantage, each testing the other's defenses. Blood matted both their coats, but Eleanor could sense that Ezra fought with the clear, focused precision of the truly balanced shifter, while Sebastian's attacks grew increasingly desperate and erratic. The three subordinate wolves continued testing Eleanor's barrier, probing for weaknesses. One found a slight thinning in the energy field and pushed through, snarling as it charged toward her at the circle's center. Without panic, Eleanor focused her will through the medallion, channeling a concentrated burst of power that struck the wolf mid-leap, throwing it backward with such force that it crashed into one of the standing stones with an audible crack of breaking bone. From the forest beyond the stone circle came new sounds of conflict, shouts and howls that indicated reinforcements had arrived. Through her expanded awareness, Eleanor sensed Logan leading a counterattack against Sebastian's forces, who found themselves suddenly caught between defenders approaching from two directions. More surprisingly, she sensed a new presence arriving from the direction of Ravenhollow, a group led by Catherine Harrington of all people. Through her enhanced perception, Eleanor could see that Catherine had rallied townspeople loyal to her, bringing them to the sanctuary not to attack, but to oppose her brother's forces. "Your pack is faltering," she called to Sebastian, her voice carrying unnatural power that penetrated even the focus of combat. "Look around you, Sebastian. Even your sister has turned against your cause." The russet wolf snarled in response, breaking away from Ezra to launch himself directly at Eleanor, a desperate gamble to eliminate the source of the barrier that had severed his soul-binder connection. Ezra intercepted him mid-leap, the two massive bodies colliding in mid-air before crashing to the ground in a tangle of fur and fangs. This time, Ezra maintained the advantage, pinning Sebastian to the earth with powerful jaws closed around his throat, not yet delivering the killing bite, but holding him immobilized, at mercy. Through their bond, Eleanor felt Ezra's question, whether to end Sebastian's life or offer the chance of surrender and redemption. Before she could respond, a piercing howl cut through the night, not from any of the combatants in the stone circle, but from deeper in the forest. The sound carried unmistakable authority, another alpha, announcing presence and intent. The fighting around the stone circle paused momentarily, as all wolves, regardless of allegiance, responded instinctively to the call. A massive black wolf emerged from the trees, followed by a dozen others. The Morgan pack had arrived from the Eastern Territories, responding to Ezra's call for allies. From the opposite direction came Catherine Harrington, accompanied by Dr. Sullivan and a group of townspeople armed with silver weapons. Catherine's face showed none of her usual arrogance. Instead, she appeared somber, determined, her eyes clear of the influence that had guided her actions for so long. "Sebastian?" she called to the pinned wolf, her voice carrying both authority and profound sadness. "It's over. The soulbinders have abandoned us. They used us, brother, twisted our legitimate concerns into weapons for their own purposes." She stepped forward, placing herself between her brother and the townspeople she had brought. "Surrender now, while you still have a chance at redemption." Sebastian's remaining forces, now outnumbered and with their leader at Ezra's mercy, began to retreat, melting back into the forest rather than facing certain defeat. The two subordinate wolves, still capable of movement, followed, leaving their injured companion and their alpha behind. Within the circle, Sebastian ceased struggling against Ezra's hold, his body going limp in submission. Ezra maintained his grip, awaiting Eleanor's judgment. She approached the defeated alpha, kneeling beside the two wolves. "The choice is simple," she told Sebastian, her voice carrying the authority of the fully realized seeress. "Accept the new barrier and the natural balance it represents, renouncing your soulbinder allegiance permanently, or die here as an enemy of all living things in this world." Through the bond, she felt Ezra's approval of the offered choice, harsh but fair, acknowledging both justice and mercy in proper balance. The russet wolf's eyes held hatred still, but also a dawning recognition of defeat. Slowly, deliberately, he tilted his head to expose his throat further, the traditional gesture of absolute submission among shifters. "A wise choice," Eleanor acknowledged, nodding to Ezra. The silver wolf released his hold, stepping back but maintaining watchful readiness should Sebastian attempt betrayal. The russet wolf remained motionless for several moments, then painfully shifted back to human form, the transformation noticeably slower and more difficult than before. Sebastian knelt on the ground, blood seeping from multiple wounds, his expression a mixture of hatred and resignation. "Kill me and be done with it," he said hoarsely. "I'll never accept your balance willingly." "Death would be easier," Eleanor agreed, "but less useful to the world. Instead, you will live, but bound by oath and magic to serve the very balance you sought to destroy. Your strength and knowledge turned to protection rather than destruction." She reached out, placing her palm against Sebastian's forehead. Drawing on the combined power of the stone circle, the medallion, and her bond with Ezra, she crafted a binding, not to control Sebastian's will, but to create consequences should he ever again attempt to harm the barrier or those who maintained it. "By the power of the seeress tradition and the authority of the true Alpha bloodline," she intoned formally, "I bind you to this oath, to protect rather than harm, to build rather than destroy, to maintain the barrier between worlds rather than weaken it. Break this oath, and your shifting ability will be forever lost." Sebastian shuddered as the binding took hold, magical energy wrapping around his essence like unbreakable chains. When Eleanor removed her hand, a small mark remained on his forehead, a stylized raven visible only to enhanced perception, the sign of his binding. "You're no better than the soulbinders," he spat, though the fight had gone out of him, "controlling others for your own purposes." "The difference," Eleanor replied calmly, "is that you remain free to choose your path within the bounds of not destroying the world, a significant distinction your soulbinder masters never offered you." Catherine stepped forward, her expression complex, shame, relief, and determination mingling in her features. "I will take responsibility for him," she said, addressing both Eleanor and Ezra, who had shifted back to human form and now stood wrapped in a cloak provided by Victor. "And for those who followed us, we have much to atone for." Through her enhanced perception, Eleanor could see that Catherine's transformation was genuine. The severing of her soulbinder connection had allowed her true self to emerge from beneath years of subtle corruption. This was not a woman seeking to avoid punishment, but one genuinely facing the consequences of actions she now recognized as partially driven by outside influence. "The town needs healing," Eleanor agreed, "and you understand better than most how the soulbinders work, how they manipulate existing fears and resentments. That knowledge will be valuable in the months ahead." Dr. Sullivan stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Catherine's shoulder. "I will guide her," the librarian promised, "and ensure that both Harringtons fulfill their obligations to the renewed balance." As the eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn, the sanctuary slowly returned to order. Sebastian was taken into custody, his remaining followers scattered or captured. The Morgan Pack and other allies who had arrived during the night helped secure the perimeter, ensuring no further threats remained. In Ravenhollow, the effects of the Ravenclaw mirror gradually subsided, leaving a town profoundly changed. Freed from soulbinder influence, the citizens began the difficult process of examining which of their fears and conflicts had been genuine and which had been artificially intensified by outside forces. The divisiveness that had characterized relations between the town and the Blackwood leadership began to heal as Catherine worked alongside Dr. Sullivan to explain the true nature of the threat they had all faced. Eleanor and Ezra stood at the edge of the stone circle, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the standing stones. Through their bond, they shared a profound sense of completion, ancient purposes fulfilled, balance restored both within themselves and within the larger world they had sworn to protect. "It's never truly over, is it?" Eleanor said quietly. "The barrier will need maintenance. The soulbinders will seek new allies, new weaknesses to exploit." "That's why the bond exists," Ezra replied, his arms circling her waist with protective warmth. "Not just for a single battle or ritual, but for the ongoing guardianship of the boundary between worlds." Eleanor leaned slightly against his solid presence, feeling the perfection of their connection. Two complementary natures united in common purpose, exactly as Freya and Fenrir had intended when they established the first pact centuries ago. "Then we continue what they began," she said, "not as a burden, but as a privilege. Together." The raven medallion at her throat pulsed once with answering warmth, acknowledgement from all the seers who had come before her that the tradition remained unbroken. Through blood and magic, wisdom and strength, the barrier would stand, protecting the balance of worlds for generations yet to come.